evening, everyone. I apologize for the delay. I was waiting for the rest of the state delegation to arrive. They're running late. So I am First Selectwoman Brenda Kupchick. As most of you have been reading, there is an application by the United Illuminating that stretches across the town, and it has caused great concern for our community. I put in my newsletter, I don't know if everyone here is signed up for that, but I put out about this meeting so that residents could know about it, because there's obviously a lot of concern. So I had asked about a month ago to UI if they would hold a town hall meeting for residents and businesses in our community to be able to ask questions and get answers to those questions, which I think is important. Before I and again, this is UI's town hall meeting. Now, the delegation we all represent, well, the state delegation, the state Senator Tony Wong represents the entire town of Fairfield, and then each of our state reps represent different portions of the town. And I obviously am the leader of the entire town. So I have great concern about this as well. The town has filed an intervenor status, as have several businesses and homeowners. So I just want to say before I hand it over to UI, I have been receiving some reports that unfortunately an issue that's impacting our entire community is sort of becoming politicized to a certain extent. And I really am asking sincerely for our community tonight to ask questions, because we have residents and businesses who have real impact to their properties. And I don't think it would be appropriate to politicize an important issue like this that has real impacts on people's lives. So I'm going to ask that this not turn into political theater, and that we have a civil and respectful town hall. I'll ask questions of United Illuminating. They have a host of people here, and have them answer them. I want to say that I also put it in my newsletter that I am working with our state delegation, most specifically Senator Wong and Representative Leeper. We are putting together a priority list of residents and businesses we feel are most impacted, and we have the assurance of the president, who met in my office last week with the state delegation, that they would sit down and work with us on those issues. Now, I don't know if that outcome is going to be something that's going to be amendable, but I'm always willing to try, because that's what leaders do. You try to work with them. Now, we have the intervening status in the siting council, but I also want to have the opportunity to make those adjustments if we can make them. And so, having said that, I am going to hand it over to United Illuminating, and you ready? Just for everyone's edification, I know they're going to go through some cards that were pre-submitted with questions, and then they're going to open it up, and there's a microphone in the center, and there's a button here. FairTV said that you have to turn it on towards you for it to go on. So I'll hand it over to you now.
Yeah, thank you, First Selectwoman. Appreciate it. Appreciate everybody coming tonight. Good evening. We need Jim Cole, the Vice President of Projects. Tonight we're looking at this as a real good opportunity to understand first the project. We want to explain to you what the project is doing and what the project is not doing, and certainly get across as much information clearly as we can. You know, I have my folks here with me, many experts who are running the project, engineering the project, managing the project. We're going to try to answer all your questions. Sometimes we get a little technical and a little jargony, so please stop us, and we'll take some time to explain that. We want to all get on the same page about what this project is doing and also what it is not doing. We also want to talk about the process we go through. We are currently in the Connecticut Siting Council process, and we're working through that. It's not a complete project process yet. We're still looking to get that final approval. And we'll also talk to you about what we have done and what we're going to do going forward to hopefully work with you and the town, and take any of your comments, any of your thoughts, opportunities, and ideas. We may not be able to respond to them all tonight, but we certainly will make an attempt after this meeting to answer anything that's lingering after this meeting. So we have a presentation. We did have a video going up here that shows the project. Hopefully you had a chance to look at that. We also have a very good website that we can share the link to. It has a lot of information about the project. It's been out there for a number of years. It has good detailed information. And we have, like I said, many experts here tonight with us to answer your questions. So I won't take any more time with this opening introduction, and I'll turn it over to Sean Crosby, who's our project unit manager for this project. Sean?
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate your time. First Selectwoman and her delegation, appreciate you coming out tonight. Members of the public, thank you very much for coming and listening to UI explain our Fairfield to Congress project and what's basically under our docket 516. And then we'll go through a presentation and we'll give you some more information on how we got there and why. So give me a moment to pull that up while I'm doing that. What I want to go over is a couple ground rules on what's going to happen tonight. So give me a moment. All right, so for the purposes of tonight's meeting, right, we're gonna go over the project, why we got there, how we got there. We'd like to explain everything to get it out. I would say on the level, there's been some obviously discussion out there between the members of the public and what's going to happen, how it's going to be constructed. When we get through that, what we'll end up doing is, as mentioned by Jim and First Selectwoman, we have a mic here that you can come up to and ask your questions. We have a panel. I'll introduce them in a moment. And there's also another opportunity, right? So our public outreach person, Leslie Downey, she's here in the front. If you have one of these cards and you'd like to submit a question, please don't hesitate to submit a question, and we will bring it up here, and we will review it, and we'll provide you an answer, or we'll provide it to one of our experts on the panel here. A couple other kind of formalities. Bathrooms are out here to the left. So if you need to use the restroom at any time, that's where it's located. I'm not from this area or this school, so I just figured I'd give you that insight. So introductions in terms of our team. So you met Jim Cole. He's our Vice President of Projects. Myself, Sean Crosby. I'm the unit manager for the Transmission Lines Unit here at UI in Connecticut. We have Matt Scully. He is our construction chief. We have Mina Sazanowicz. She is our principal engineer. Corrine Auer, manager of our environmental permitting team. Dr. Benjamin Kotz. He's with Exponent, our subject matter expert on EMF. And we have Brian Gaudette with All Points. He's also a subject matter expert for visual renderings. So we have a lot of people here tonight on our project team that can hopefully answer your questions. We've seen and read through a lot of the discussion you've had out there, whether it's submission of our interrogatories to the Siting Council, articles that you've put out there. So we want to let you know we're hearing what's going on. There's also other avenues for communication. A couple of the folks tonight asked the question. We provide them that. Also provides you a communication path there. So how it all works, right? So we've heard from First Selectwoman and in the interrogatories, there is a process. We want to make sure you guys understand that process. That process starts in terms of trying to understand a project need. That project need, we look at, is it a reliability need in our electrical system, or is it asset condition? We build a solution study. We evaluate that asset, that transmission line, that substation, that distribution line, whatever it is. In this case, we're on a transmission project. So then we go to what would be our jurisdictional body in determining if a project is viable and that need is there. So that would be our ISO New England. So our independent system operator, they have a couple parts. So we would submit a PPA to that group, which defines our project and what it is, and propose an alternative or two to that. They would accept that project, and then we would move towards detailed engineering. In our detailed engineering, we do our due diligence. We're doing our due diligence now, which you'll see in the schedule, which is soil boring, survey work, environmental work in terms of resource areas, looking at visual impacts, looking at historical impacts. I'm sure some of you have questions on. I've seen them come in tonight. Then we go to our project permitting, which Jim mentioned earlier, the Siting Council. Right? We have an application in front of the Siting Council that defines our project, what our preferred alternative is, and they review that. They cross-examine us, our experts. You have opportunity to submit as an intervener, as First Selectwoman Kupchick mentioned. The town of Fairfield is an intervener. There's a few other parties that are interveners in that process. You can also submit, I believe as the public, you can submit comments to them in terms, I believe some folks maybe in the room or from Southport or Fairfield have done that, and we see that come through. During the siting process, also, we start to work on some of our permitting aspects, and we determine what our impacts are there. It's defined in the siting council application as we refine our engineering detailed. Once we get a siting council decision, we move ourselves into our pre-construction activity. We start having conversations with property owners. We can't have conversations in detail about what we need for easements with property owners until we know we have a defined project. That's why you have not been contacted individually about property. I can understand why folks out there are wondering about why they haven't been contacted, but we have a process that we follow. Everybody is kept along that same line, okay? Once we start working towards easement and getting access to property, we also then go back to ISO New England to represent a transmission cost allocation to define our project budget relative to the scope that's been approved by our jurisdictional body in the state of Connecticut, the Siting Council. Then we move into our construction phase, right? So I want to also point out that on the right side of the screen here, you have the map that ISO New England has jurisdiction over. It is a very large grid. All those projects that are there, it could be a small segment of the project, but this depiction of the transmission system map in New England is what ISO has jurisdiction over. They look at all projects and they evaluate the need for them with the business, which would be in this case UI. This breaks it down a little bit further in terms of the transmission system in Connecticut. The blue outline that you see is UI's territory. We're obviously made up of 17 municipalities and towns. Right there in the green circle, you have the area that the Fairfield Congress project is within. We've heard some questions that have come out. What's the benefit to Fairfield, Southport, Bridgeport, the local communities from the grid? We'll talk about that, but in general, it's hardening our system to make sure it's resilient and meets the climate change. Asset condition is important for us. We'll talk about that in a little bit of detail in terms of what the structures look like. So right now, 3 of those substations that we have out there on our grid, it has benefit to the people of Fairfield in terms of hardening the system to make sure when we have a catastrophic or a potential catastrophic event that we're still providing electricity to our customers, right? Yes, I apologize. Thank you for that. So this slide gives us an indication on our program. So this has been a long-lasting, it's been since 2012, the railroad upgrade program. So we go from New Haven to Southport/Fairfield where we interconnect with Eversource. I know there's some questions on the Eversource UI relationship and how those project sequence go. So we can talk about that. But ultimately, we started this program in 2012, addressing some of the more immediate needs, and we've worked our way from segment to segment, priority to priority, and now we're on our last of our seven segments. So we've had 7 projects within the program. This is our last segment to do. A little bit of more background on it. So in 1940, UI installed the bonnets on the transmission for the transmission system at 69,000 volts within the Connecticut DOT corridor. A little bit of clarity, right? Connecticut DOT owns the property. Metro North operates on it. Our electrical assets and system is on top of their catenaries. You can see the bottom right picture, you have the catenary. It's a lattice steel structure. On top of that, you have what we refer to as the bonnets. The blue circle, for reference, is Connecticut DOT owned, Metro North operated, and UI owns the top where our transmission system sits. So in 1960, we upgraded those lines to 115,000 volts where they sit today. So when we did this project, we looked at different components of our infrastructure. We looked at the asset condition, right? We needed to see, is the structural capability there? When we did the evaluation, that was definitely checked off. It was an asset condition. We had potential risk. And the last thing we needed was some sort of event that has a cascading effect on our transmission grid, as you saw in the slide before, where something could potentially catastrophic happen in the region, and then we're not doing our obligation in supplying power to our customers. We looked at, as I mentioned, hardening the grid to be more reliable and resilient during climate change. We have some design criteria we'll talk about tonight in terms of ice and wind loading and certain NESC, National Electric Safety Code upgrades that we needed to our system since we installed that in the 70s, and we currently obviously are in 2023. As I mentioned, this is the last of 7 projects we've had on the program, right? So we've been in 6 or 7 municipalities. Fairfield we have yet to be in, so we're here now, we're presenting this project. We have successfully completed those top 5. We are in construction right now on Milvon West River, but we've been in Milford, we've been in West Haven, Stratford, Orange, Bridgeport, all of which we had the general concept of a steel monopole. I understand every community, every location is different, but there's a reason why we designed to those structures in that manner, and we'll get into that in a little bit more tonight. But we have had success in aligning the system, our electrical grid, in that manner. And we've had, if any at all, minimal to zero disruptions in the community in terms of the interaction in your day-to-day lives and businesses. So those are things that we can stand behind, and we feel very confident that our project that we're designing and presenting to the Siting Council is one that is very solid. And as First Selectwoman Kupchick mentioned, we are taking some comments and priorities from the town through First Selectwoman Kupchick and going to look through those and see what our capabilities are to work with the town and the members of the community, right? Go to the next slide. All right, so our alternatives. We've heard that there has been questions, you know, why isn't it going underground? Why aren't the catenaries being rebuilt? Why is the steel monopole the preferred choice and option? I'm going to defer to our principal engineer, Mina Suzanowicz, to go over our alternatives here and kind of give a high level. We'll also go in later in the Q&A session.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Thank you, Sean. Yes, as Sean had mentioned before, part of our project development also includes reviewing and looking at different alternatives to solve the solution that is originally presented with the transmission system. So a couple of the alternatives that we did review and are also listed and described in our Connecticut Siting Council application include alternative 1, which is listed up there, which is considered our preferred alternative, which is a double circuit configuration, primarily in Fairfield, where we have existing structures that are on the northern side of the tracks that are in a single circuit configuration. We did focus on the older assets which were installed earlier in the 40s and 60s, and also to get off the railroad catenary assets. And then further along in Bridgeport, we do have more of the double circuit configuration. Alternative 2 was single circuits throughout the corridor from the interconnection with Eversource all the way through Bridgeport to our Congress Street substation, which would mean single circuits in Fairfield, and then also in Bridgeport, we would have 2 monopoles, one on the north, one on the south side, to separate the circuits going all the way through to our Congress Street substation. As you can see there, we also provided the estimates to which we had calculated for that alternative. And then they kind of progressed down. Alternative 3 is modifications on one side of the railroad catenaries while pulling off the railroad catenaries. For example, we would do modifications on the south side of the catenaries, and the north side would have new monopoles. Alternative 4 was a complete rebuild of the Metro North Connecticut DOT catenary structures. Alternative 5 was a hybrid, which included poles, one on the north, one on the south side, all the way up further than what is currently proposed in our application to our Pequannock substation, and then double circuit on, or one pole carrying 2 circuits on the northern side of the tracks all the way through to our Congress Street substation. And then finally, we also did evaluate a full underground alternative to place all of the existing infrastructure that's currently on the catenaries in an underground configuration, going from our interconnection point all the way to our Congress Street substation. And the alternative that was presented and is our preferred solution, the company feels, or the company has shown to be the most cost-effective alternative that we have reviewed, that also solves the issue that was found in the asset condition study that we had provided.
Thanks, Mina. I appreciate that. A couple things to note. I know a lot of information probably getting flown out. So double circuit means we have a steel monopole that is in our location, and we have 2 circuits on the monopole where there's 3 phases, right? One on each side. Single circuit would mean 1 steel pole, right, with 1 circuit on it, 3 phases on it. We can bring up a picture and show that to you to help you. The cost you have here is a plus. The baseline is the $255 million that we presented in our Siting Council 516 to this. That's what we're presenting tonight to you folks, right? We'll also be able to answer questions, but we want to baseline the process so that you understand where we're at to go in any sort of detail in any direction. A couple of things that are prohibitive, right? We have cost prohibitive in terms of underground. You see it's $745 million more than our 255 baseline of what our alternative 1 is, and that we have some challenges there, right? Probably the question is, why can't we go into Connecticut DOT right away to put our underground in, right? We work with Connecticut DOT hand in hand along with Metro North. Connecticut DOT does not allow any longitudinal underground infrastructure. That means anything within their right of way, they will not support or approve, right? So we cannot put our, if it was an underground solution we were presenting, we could not put it in that right of way. That's why our underground indicates in the streets, right? So real quick, I'm happy to repeat that, right? And I'm happy to answer questions when we get to the Q&A. I apologize. I want to get through the presentation. I want to take it in the pace that you would like it to understand it. But if you have questions, if people are yelling out, it'll be hard to answer, right? So I apologize. But so we work with Connecticut DOT. We work with all their different branches. So we are working with their transportation branch. We're working with the folks that have oversight of the Metro North corridor. So we present to them, we ask them our different alternatives that you see here. Connecticut DOT, because of their infrastructure being installed in 1910, 1912, right around, I believe, that's when that train line went from New Haven down into New York. There was utilities installed in there. I can't explain their perspective, but when we ask them, is a underground alternative in your right-of-way a viable option? The answer is it is not. We will not support that option. Right? So we cannot install something in that right of way that's an underground asset for UI. All right, so I'm going to go over the overview and scope of our current alternative 1, which is the alignment that Mrs. Zanowicz mentioned is in what's in our current docket for the CSC. Total rebuild distance, a lot of this is in the Siting Council application. I'm not sure if everyone in the room has read it, but it's 7.3 miles from Bridgeport to Southport, right? We are rebuilding what is on the current catenaries, that the bonnets that UI owns. We're removing those off of the catenaries, and we're putting them on alignments of a double circuit steel monopole or a single circuit, depending on where we are at in the project area. Project need is based on asset condition. As mentioned, we did a study. That study was done in this area in 2019 to evaluate an asset condition. We also have to increase that that project to meet NESC code, as I mentioned, National Electric Safety Committee. We are also making it compliant with our wind and ice loading pieces due to certain climate change and severe weather conditions. And we want to make sure, you've heard me say this, it is more resilient, the system is hardened, so that we're doing our obligation as UI, providing that electricity to our customers. one thing to note, if we look at the table that's being presented, I'm sure folks in this room, the majority are from either Southport or Fairfield. We have about 4.8 miles of project area in Fairfield. We're on 104 catenaries that are in Fairfield that are owned by Connecticut DOT. There's 109 bonnets on those catenaries that we are removing. We're proposing 68 new structures, right? So when we have a project that's a transmission rebuild project, a lot of times we do a like-for-like rebuild. We have a project in Ansonia, Derby that's similar to a like-for-like rebuild. So here we are minimizing our footprint within the right-of-way the best we can, or directly abutting that right-of-way to the best of our capability. We'll talk about some of the design constraints, why we have structures at a certain height tonight, why our spans are at certain lengths, why we did that, why we designed it the way we did. We estimate 5.8 acres of vegetation clearing. We understand and we hear from the people of Fairfield that is a concern, right? We are restoring those areas. We are putting back vegetation. But what we have to be cognizant of is that we cannot put in 70, 80-foot tall trees, because that would mean it would be somewhat, we'd be hurting ourselves, right? Because you have a clearance issue. And we want to make sure we're going to be installing 30-foot or less trees that are typical in the industry so that we can maintain our clearance requirements of our veg clearing. So anything that we clear for our proposed construction project, we are restoring to what we would estimate at a 30-foot height, where we would abut up against the Connecticut DOT right-of-way. Estimated new right-of-way in acres, we're looking in Fairfield. I know there's a number out there. I want to clarify that. We're 8.63 acres. We're on about 0.97 of that is residential. The remaining balance is on industrial or commercial in that area. Some of the Connecticut Siting Council process, want to make sure fully transparency. I know that's something that there's probably questions in the room on, right? Is UI being transparent? We are fully transparent. We have a website out there that has all of our application documents, all of our information on the project that we have. And what we have now is up here is the Connecticut Siting Council process, right? So those that don't know the Siting Council, so they're basically a state agency founded to oversee telecommunication, cable TV, generation, transmission, and substation projects. We submit an application for our project to them, and there's a process within that application that goes through means of interrogatories from people that are interveners or have party status. There's an opportunity for public comment period within the first hearing, or public comment through communications submitted to the council. We have hearings where we have cross-examination of our experts, interveners experts, or the council has questions for us directly on our application. And to date, we've had 2 hearings on the 25th of July and the 29th of August. We have 2 more hearings scheduled for October 17th and then November 16th of this year. The Siting Council has a statutory requirement to render a decision on the project or make a decision on the application in front of them within a 12-month period from when we submit the application, which we submitted on, I believe it was March 17th of 2023. So on this slide, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Ben Kotz, who is our EMF expert. He's going to talk a little bit about what the EMF levels are, both existing and what they're proposed for on the project, to give a little information to the folks in the room. Ben?
Thank you, Sean. As Sean mentioned, electric and magnetic fields, or EMF, is something that not a lot of people have a lot of experience with. And so I want to provide a little bit of an overview. EMF stands for electric and magnetic fields, and it essentially is a property of space, kind of like heat from a fire, light in a room, and it surrounds anything that transmits, generates, or uses electricity. There are some obvious sources of that we're thinking about today, the transmission line for sure. But that also includes things like the wooden distribution poles that bring the electricity to our house, and things that are even less obvious for a lot of people, which are things that use electricity in the house, things like vacuums, refrigerators, hair dryers, and things of that nature. And as it says here, Project EMF are regulated by the Connecticut Siting Council. There are a couple of properties about EMF. One, as it says there, the important thing is that they decrease very quickly with distance. And because EMF are associated with so many things in modern life, so many things use electricity or generate electricity, there's been an awful lot of research on that. There's been over 40 years of research about electric and magnetic fields, and there have been international standards that have been established below which there are no confirmed health effects. And that's what's being shown on the graph here. You can see on the vertical axis, this is the strength of the magnetic field, and on the horizontal axis, this is distance away from the center of the right-of-way. And you can see up at the very top, there's an arrow that's pointing to the ICNIRP reference level. It's the worst acronym in the history of acronyms. It's the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, but it's been established and used worldwide for decades. You'll see here that both before and after the project, the magnetic fields from the project are very low compared to this limit, about 10 times below or lower. And so because they're so small, you kind of have to zoom in to really see the project difference. And what you'll see here is when you zoom in, the orange is a graph of what the existing magnetic field levels are for the project as it stands today. And a blue is the proposed magnetic field level. The first thing that'll jump out at you is there are two things. One, that the magnetic field levels after the project, particularly the highest levels, decrease pretty substantially. The highest levels are about half after the project is what they are compared to today. The other aspect of this, coming back to what I said at the beginning, magnetic field levels in EMF decrease very rapidly with distance from the source. So you can see that both existing and the proposed magnetic field levels decrease such that as you get outside the right-of-way, which are kind of shown by those vertical dashed lines or the easement, the field levels decrease very rapidly to an even lower level and even further below international guidelines.
The question that came in, I'm going to, so just the question, so everyone can hear to make sure when Ben answered, Dr. Ben Constance answered the question, the gentleman asked, the reason the EMF levels are lower, is it because of the height? And the answer from Ben was yes. So I'm going to keep moving forward through the presentation.
So I think they want to wait until they're done with their presentation, and then they're going to have people line up and ask questions at the microphone, because FairTV is taping this for anyone who couldn't attend tonight. So they'll have the opportunity to be able to hear people's questions and the answers as well. So
thank you, First Selectwoman. I apologize. We'll get to everybody's questions the best we can. So the next slide we have up here, also we've heard and we are fully aware, is resource area impacts and those mitigation measures that we would do. I'm going to hand this over to Corrine Auer, our permitting manager. She's going to provide some insight on what you're seeing on the screen.
Thank you, Sean. I'm going to run through it. I have the list here. I can speak to it. This is the list of resources that we reviewed in Fairfield. So we designed our project to limit and avoid impacts to sensitive resources. And part of our due diligence activities included a water resource field survey conducted by professional wetland scientists and certified professional soil scientists. So sure, sorry. So the first resource I'll discuss is non-tidal water courses. We have 9 non-tidal water courses that were delineated across the project, and we only have a temporary impact across one of them, which is amounting to about 0.01 acres, and that's to just access the location of one of the monopole locations where we're going to be using construction mats to span over the water course. And then we have no permanent impacts in non-tidal watercourses. The next row was for tidal watercourses. We have 4 tidal watercourses delineated on the project, and we have about 0.09 acres of impact, a temporary impact in that tidal watercourse, which happens to be Ash Creek. And that impact is actually located in Bridgeport on that southern side of Ash Creek near the Ash Creek substation. There's a tower, a lattice tower on the small island that needs to be removed as part of the project. So that 0.09 acres of temporary impact is just to be put construction matting out to access the island, but that's just a temporary impact where the mats will be removed after that removal is conducted. And then we have no permanent impacts in any tidal wetlands. The next row is inland wetlands, and the temporary impacts that we have amount to about 1/10 of an acre, and that's from construction matting that will be put down for temporary work pads. And we do have, the only permanent impact that we have to an inland wetland, it amounts to about 0.04 acres, and that's just from a permanent access road that will be installed on the edge of one of the delineated wetlands. And this access road is being installed to, for resiliency purposes and for emergencies, and it provides quicker access for our vehicles to get out to maintain the lines. So tidal wetlands, we just have a temporary impact in tidal wetlands of about 0.03 acres, and that's also associated with the removal in Bridgeport on that small island in Ash Creek. And it's just on the bank of the shore there, so there's gonna be construction matting that's on the edge of the bank there in the tidal wetland, and then that'll also flow into that part of Ash Creek so that we can access that island for that removal. And we have no permanent impacts to tidal wetlands. And vernal pools were also assessed as part of the water resource survey, and none were identified on this project. There were no obligate species were found during the appropriately timed surveys. In terms of clearing, Sean already discussed that we have about 5 acres of permanent clearing and less than an acre of temporary clearing. And the temporary clearing is in areas where we just need to clear trees for access, but then those areas will be allowed to revegetate naturally with trees. The 5 acres of the permanent clearing, that will be an area where it'll be maintained and managed with low growth vegetative species, and that's to meet the vegetation management standards and the transmission line clearance requirements. And more into the mic. Sorry. And then we have, specifically in the wetlands, there's about 0.1 acres of permanent vegetation conversion where there's a permanent road being installed, or to maintain vegetation as low growth species for the wire clearances. That's where if there was a forested wetland that needed to be converted to a scrub shrub wetland. And then flood zones, there's 11 poles and 2 gravel access roads in a 100-year flood zone. And we have 4 poles and a portion of a gravel access road in a 500-year flood zone. And these are the areas with either the 1% annual flood chance or the 0.2% annual flood chance. We've deemed that the displacement of the flood zone storage capacity is minimal, particularly when compared to the total drainage area. Additionally, the proposed gravel roads will be flush with the existing grades so that it won't impact the flood zone storage. So, as you can see, we have minimal resource impacts. We're going to be applying for our permits with the Connecticut DEP and the Army Corps. And is part of those permits, there'll be best management practices and other specific mitigation measures that will be required that we will follow. So that's it.
Thank you, Corinne. Appreciate your insight on that. A couple things I want to know. We're going to get to a slide on a schedule, right? So we've talked about EMF. We talked about our resource area impacts and mitigation, right? So those that live in Fairfield and Southport and along the route know there's a lot of resource areas along that area, right? Our project, and if you go back to one of the slides I referenced, we had 102 total poles from Bridgeport to Fairfield, right? In Fairfield, we have around 68 poles. Some of the offsets that we have to evaluate, right, we want to minimize putting poles in certain locations to have additional resource area impact. I can completely understand that the numbers that you see up here seem like they are large impacts to the project, right? We have done our very best job to minimize those impacts by having taller structures, which means a longer span, right? We also have capabilities where EMF levels go down. At our current project or current location of our assets, those EMF levels that Dr. Ben Kotz pointed out were low levels. We are lowering that EMF level as we are removing that asset off the catenary and putting it on a steel monopole. We are minimizing our environmental impacts as we are making our structures taller because it compensates for the EMF, but it also minimizes the impact to the environment. We also evaluate a huge component, right, which is the built environment, which are the structures, the buildings, the homes, people's businesses that are along this route, right? We do not want to put, when we don't have to, an additional structure to lower the line so that we are having a challenge in designing around that to meet our design criteria. So we have to evaluate what the current built environment looks like, what the resource areas are, what other components like EMF are, and that's how we balance our determination of our design on our project that we have in our current docket at 516. So these are all very good components of our project and our design. Some pieces of our project related to our schedule, very high level. So we talked about project due diligence, what that was. And I want to indicate a misstep in terms of communication. Early on in the project, we did have right of entries with property owners. We asked for access, as we do, to do certain due diligence, right? We want to make sure we're communicating that, right? Our ISO New England process, I mentioned in terms of our proposed plan application, and that we also need to go back to them for our transmission cost allocation. All right. Our CSC process, as mentioned, we're 1 year from that March 2023 date to March 2024. We're in the middle of that. That's ongoing. Engineering, that gets us to what we call our issue for construction drawings. And we're still ongoing with that. And our estimated start of construction, we anticipate, based on the current docket and the process around it, that we would start in Q1 of 2025. And we have an in-service obligation that we communicate to ISO and our external stakeholders on it. This is our schedule. Oh, we also have restoration activities that we would perform based on vegetation clearing, based on impervious area impacts related to access roads for constructions, work pads. We do restoration on the properties to make sure it's put back to its, as was site condition. Those are all things that we've done on our previous 5 completed successful projects. So these are things that we can definitely stand behind and know that we will get that done. So some components of our project activities. Top right-hand corner, you can see you have some site civil work, a drilling operation that's going on. This is in the Metro North Corridor. This is down in, I believe, the town of Orange or West Haven, right on the line, where we have a civil crew out there. We have right to you see the center black line. I know it's small for everybody in the crowd, but that's silt fence that we have up with trap rock to the right. That's our access road right there. On the left side, close to what you see is the grade in the Metro North Corridor, there is a wetland. We are protecting that wetland. We don't want to impact it, right? We have a bridge spanning that stream. So these are things that we do on our projects, right? So in terms of work hours, right, our typical work hours will be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., pending some potential constraints on those work hours that are associated with Metro North operating conditions, where we have to cross the tracks, minimize impacts to Metro North. Right, where we would do weekend or night hours. Our environmental stewardship, we stand strongly behind it. It was part of the business that I was in long before I am where I am right now. We want to make sure we're minimizing those impacts to sensitive areas, right? On our bottom right-hand corner, I'm sure some folks in the room keep an eye on that. That is an osprey nest, right? We survey our projects for migratory birds, all different kinds of species. We're looking at the northern long-eared bat, right? We look at those different components of our project and how do we minimize or have zero impact to that species or habitat, right? We have plans. We're working with the state of Connecticut on how we can minimize that. We've had letters submitted by the Ash Creek Conservation Committee, Kareem, and we're acknowledging those letters. We're not discounting them. These are things we fully intend to do. Outreach. We've had continuous outreach on this project since 2021. So we can talk about the outreach when we get to it, right? But we have sent letters to our project abutters. We've notified folks, and we continue to do that. There's opportunity for people to reach out to UI related to our website, email addresses, ask questions, right? There's a process that UI follows, that we are submitting an application to the Connecticut Siting Council. They review it. Your opportunity to comment, your opportunity to interact on the project is through the Connecticut Siting Council. But we're not saying that you can't reach out to us through our email. So construction scope activities, right? Some of the stuff that you'll see out there. Vegetation clearing, we talked about those areas where we're going to clear the estimated total area. We fully intend to perform restoration. Erosion and sediment controls, we'll align that with the Connecticut general permit for stormwater activities on a construction site. We'll submit a stormwater pollution control plan. We'll apply for their general permit. Other types of permits that we'll need for the temporary and permanent impacts that we have on the projects. Fully intend to comply with state and federal agencies and get those permits in place. Development of access roads and work pads. These are things that our contractors need to go out to these locations, and we need to have safe roads. Everybody wants to go home the way they came into work. These are things that we take seriously, our safety, so we have to build access roads out there and work pads that are level. Matt Scully, our construction chief, does a great job with our teams in making sure that that is done to the right manner. We have specifications we put out there for our contractors to do. Drilling of foundations based on pole heights, pole widths, pole weights, etc. Installation of our monopoles, steel monopoles, hanging of hardware, removal of our old infrastructure, and then ultimate restoration. So a couple of our questions that we've seen, we wanted to highlight before we get into the Q&A, right? But before I get into these, I want to remind everybody, I know everybody's got a lot of questions, and we want to try and answer them, right? That's the idea. That's one of the main objectives of this meeting. These are 7 of questions that we saw come in prior to the interrogatories. I have a list of cards here that we got, Leslie was provided from folks in the audience. We will do our best to read those questions through and answer those questions for you tonight. So what are the easements UI will need, and will a property owner be compensated for an easement, right? So we have a construction project. And we need temporary access to that location for a period of time, which is the construction activities we need, right? So we have an area that's a work area that we feel in a constructability review with contractors that perform transmission line projects have given us their insight. We've talked to our engineering teams, we've talked to our construction teams, we've worked with our environmental teams to try and minimize the size of those locations. But those easements could be on your property, they could be on businesses. They're a temporary period that will be defined once we have a approved project that allows us to start having conversation with you in a more definitive manner to say what we need and for how long we would ask for it for, right? There is compensation to that process, right? There is the means we look at it, we get a license appraisal done of your property. We look at the square footage of what we need. And then our team with Energy Land Management works with you, and their folks that are their contractors that are experts in that area work with you to try and cohabitate in the same area for a temporary period for that construction easement. We also have a need for a long-term operational easement, right? There's certain locations that we need to make sure that when we install an asset, transmission line or structure, that our maintenance folks or operations folks can get in there in times of emergency for inspection purposes. Those are in basic perpetuity. Those are also compensated for. We fully understand that there's the question out there, right? We have no intentions either right now of any eminent domain. There's rumors going around. We don't intend to do that. So we want to be clear what we're asking for in our application to the Connecticut Siting Council for our work activities, but also be clear tonight if there's any misconception on what that easement process is and when it would come in. All right, so can UI go underground with this project? Right, I'm going to turn it over a little bit to Mina Suzanowicz, our principal engineer, to talk about, can we go underground?
Thank you, Sean, for the question. So UI has considered this as part of their alternatives, and we have developed a conceptual design around going underground for the entirety of the project, from our interconnection at Sasko Creek to Eversource's transmission grid, all the way back to our Congress Street substation in Bridgeport. A couple of things that we keep in consideration when evaluating an underground alternative are potential right-of-ways and where we would be able to install these. So I do remember there were some questions regarding underground in the Metro-North CDOT railroad corridor. So that had been a discussion, and as Sean had mentioned, that the CDOT and railroad would not be in support of any parallel or longitudinal installations underground. And based on our discussions with those entities, some of the main reasons for that would include any kind of train station upgrades that they would like to do. Also, their upgrades to their own physical infrastructure in the corridor to allow for faster trains. Another aspect, that we also take into consideration, other than, the overall cost, would be the greater impact to residents during construction. This would include road closures to be able to open and trench and install the duct bank, which consists of conduit and concrete. We do anticipate that this would take significantly longer than an overhead installation. And the third point specific, I guess, to this project in a sense is, because we are not able to parallel the tracks and be within the Metro-North corridor, there would be additional impacts to residents in order for us to get from our interconnection point, which is at Sasko Creek, out to a public road, since we would not be able to use that state corridor, CDOT corridor, in order to go underground. So with that, that's the main considerations. We also have presented this alternative to the Connecticut Siting Council as part of our application and docket.
Thank you, Mina. In short, there's constraints on it. I know you want a yes or no answer, but there's a lot that goes into what would be close to a $1 billion project and justifying a thought behind it. So we take into consideration that we have a process that we follow. Connecticut Siting Council has the jurisdiction over our transmission project. We've presented opportunities with them within the underground alternative. But as UI indicated, our alternative one, what we feel is the most cost-effective, compliant project that we're able to design and potentially construct based on a decision, right? So, so why was I unaware of the project in the CSC process, right? We hear a lot of that. I hear a lot of it in the audience tonight. So our obligation, right, we are good, and you can make your comments. I'm okay with that. We feel we are good corporate citizens to the public on our project team. We have, since 2021, we have notified residents that abut the project area, that we have sent out postcards to those residents, bill inserts. So just these are things that we have done and that there is record of. So we make folks. Okay. So I am just reciting that the fact that we have sent out notification about the project, right? Through mailings. So I'm going to go to the next question. So I want to make sure we get through questions. I'm not trying to avoid that question, but the answer to that question is what I had mentioned. We have sent out notifications we go down to the town of Fairfield, city of Bridgeport offices, and we look at what the property numbers are that we have in our project route. We look at those property owners, their names, and we send out notification letters to them. And I would also, that's how we become good corporate citizens to you guys. We have sent it out. So by the Connecticut Siting Council, we also notify people that are around the substation. So why does UI not go to local authorities for approval, right? So our process for, as I mentioned, is under the Connecticut Siting Council jurisdiction. For a transmission project, we would submit there. If local folks have questions, whether it's residents of the town, whether it's businesses, if it's the town of Fairfield, city of Bridgeport, they would submit their questions to the council on the project. We have a process through the Siting Council for an application. We submit a municipal consultation filing to each one of the municipalities. So we also, as I mentioned, again, I'm sure folks are going to say, move on, going back to question 3, we have sent out notification letters. So what benefit will Fairfield obtain from the Fairfield Congress project, right? You heard me talk about it's an asset condition project, increasing reliability, the current NESC codes, along with current wind and ice loading because of climate change, the severe storms we've had, and we've hardened. Our proposed plan hardens the system, continues to meet delivery of electricity to our customers through that transmission grid, which we have 3 substations that are being interchanged with or worked through on the project that provide to customers within Fairfield. So for what is UI doing to address historical properties and districts on the project? I'm going to turn that answer over to Corrine Auer. I'll make sure she speaks directly to the microphone so that everybody can hear. So
thanks, John. So UI retained a cultural and historical resources expert who performed a Phase 1A cultural resources survey along the project corridor. And that report and project notification form was submitted to the State Historic Preservation Office about a year ago, so September of 2022. Since then, there's been a lot of correspondence back and forth between SHPO and UI, and one of the letters from SHPO requested us to expand our viewshed analysis from the standard 500 feet out to a half a mile. So that was performed by our subject matter experts of All Points, who does visual renderings and viewshed analysis, along with our cultural resources expert Heritage. Then there was further correspondence between UI and SHPO where they asked for some additional photo simulations from the impacted historical properties along the project corridor. And so our final correspondence that recently this summer from the SHPO to us was, stating that we did have a visual impact and that we would work with the SHPO to come up with a mitigation option. And that's where we stand with SHPO. So we need to work with SHPO on that, so it hasn't been decided yet.
So I would ask if you have questions, by all means, we can come up to the mic and you can ask your questions, or I can read the cards that are here and we will answer these questions. How does UI determine if a project moves forward, right? So in the current state we're in right now, as I mentioned, again, going back, reiterating it, the Connecticut Siting Council has jurisdiction over our project. We have presented them what we feel is a economically feasible, compliant project that is our double and single circuit monopole project that's presented in docket 516. Once we determine there that if we move forward with the project, they provide an approval for it, we then need to go back, as I mentioned previously, to ISO New England for our transmission cost allocation. And that basically will refine our budget, tell exactly what it is, and that's the number that you saw there tonight, about $255 million that we feel it is right now. So I'll start reading some of the cards and the questions. and I'll answer those. If you want to come up to the mic, by all means, feel free. We welcome people to come up and interact with our panel. So first question, I have no intention to read anyone's names, call anybody out. I'm not. I just want to read your question. How many parking spaces are lost, both private and public? So when we designed the project, we anticipate that no parking spaces should be lost. I do not believe that any parking spaces, if we look at where we're putting them, so I know not everyone's going to like the answer. So the answer for that question was that there's not going to be any parking space lost on our project. So next question is, why haven't UI responded to the Connecticut 5G case in federal court? I'm not sure what the 5G case in federal court is. So right now, our project is subject to the Connecticut Siting Council. And
What's the exposure to RF radio? Average person. Because
I'm sorry, sir. I'm presuming it's EMF you're asking about?
I'm sorry, this group does not have the answer for that, quite honestly. That sounds like a different topic. I certainly would like to take that offline. My name is Jim Cole. Jim Cole. Yeah, I'm not sure of the question. You're related to 5G and RF.
Because in Poland, it's 9 RF per meter square. In Russia, it's 10. Okay? The Home Depot in Norwalk is 2,200. Every high school low is over 2,000. 9 catches your retina. 10 RF, long-term exposure. I understand you have not, but 11 autism, 12 cancer, 13 infertility.
Sir, 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 sir. So let's,
I've been asking you questions. Okay.
We can expand on the question from an EMF perspective that pertains to our project. So just to clarify, Dr. Ben Kotz can relay information related to our project and the data he's taken in based on his survey. So he's going to expand on some information on EMF here.
To clarify a little bit, and I'm not directly familiar with the case that the gentleman was talking about, but if he's talking about 5G, this is a communications facility or communications protocol, kind of similar to what you would see in cell phones or things of that nature. 5G is going to be, if you're talking about frequencies, you've got AM radio is like 500 kilohertz, 500,000 hertz. FM radio is 88 megahertz, 88 million hertz. Hertz is a cycle per second. 5G is going to be gigahertz, billions of cycles per second. The transmission lines that operate both here that we're talking about for this project as well as throughout the rest of the country operate at a frequency of 60 hertz. It is a completely separate topic from the 5G that was being discussed earlier. And the 60 hertz magnetic field levels are what I was talking about before, related to the international regulations for which this project is on the order of 1/10 or less from those regulations, just to provide that clarification.
Thank you, Dr. Kotz. Sir, if you want to ask your question.
Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you.
My name's Ken Astorita. I'm a Southport resident. I also am a member of the RTM for District 10. I just have a couple of questions regarding the underground option. And I understand the expense issues involved here, but are there any advantages to doing a project like this underground? So for example, is the durability of the equipment and the lines, is that improved if you're underground? So for example, with these monopoles, do you have to replace them, I don't know, what, 30 years, 50 years, whatever it is, but if you put it underground, is the life longer?
Thank you for your question. And based on some of the research, overhead lines have a longer lifespan in general than your underground transmission lines. You have a lot of other components that are also involved in your underground lines, such as the physical insulation that has, the possibility of breaking down. You also have significantly more splices in order to connect the two cable pieces together. You also have potentially challenges with other maintenance type aspects, within your splice chambers of corrosion and that type of.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, and this is just stuff that I've heard, but I want to ask the question here. My understanding is that projects of this nature in Norwalk and Westport are underground. Is that correct or is that incorrect?
There are lines in other municipalities that are underground, yes.
And I guess my question would be, and my question would be, if they can do it in Westport and Norwalk and some of the other municipalities, why can't it be done in Fairfield?
So we have been requested that information in terms of an underground configuration by the Connecticut Siting Council through the process. They do have jurisdiction over our project and what eventually will get approved. So we are going through the process of looking at that alternative. It has been presented for their consideration.
So that is still an option that's on the table, the underground option, then, is that correct?
That is an alternative that we have presented to them, correct?
Okay, thank you.
So, good evening. My name is Mario Coppola. I practice law at Bircham Moses in Westport and Milford. Very recently, I was retained by a number of property owners in this room to represent them before the Connecticut Siting Council pertaining to this application. I wasn't planning on speaking this evening, but I did have some questions when I heard the initial part of the presentation. So at the beginning of the presentation, Mr. Crosby, you specifically stated that the first selectman mentioned you could file a petition to intervene in this application. Why would you inform this entire room of folks that people have a right to intervene when UI specifically filed motions to oppose the intervention petitions that were filed by every single property owner in Fairfield that filed a petition to intervene? Those petitions were filed in late August, and UI opposed those. So why would you? It's not a statement, really a question. Is that something that could be answered?
We didn't file a motion to oppose people to become interveners.
I don't think that's accurate. I think that's not accurate. I mean, there's a folks who go on. You could go on to docket 516 and see that UI actually did oppose every single intervener who tried to petition to come in. And the reason I asked the question is because there's a lot of other people in this room, I think, who would be interested in filing petitions to intervene in the proceeding. And at the beginning of the presentation, it seemed like there was an openness by UI to have folks petition to intervene in the proceeding. Yet, again, talk is cheap, actions speak, actions are what matter. So what is UI's position with regard to other interested property owners or residents that would like to intervene?
So to take a few steps back, we did hold a public town hall in Fairfield back in January of this calendar year. Okay, we did send notice out to folks, and we appreciate everyone's thought to that. But so we don't have, in terms of the question that the attorney asked, there's a process in play with the siting council, and that process has a time for interveners to interject. Typically, that is prior to, I believe, the first hearing. Council will correct me there. And those interveners came in post the first hearing, right? So there was some discussion around that. We're here tonight to present the project, to talk about what the process is that we followed to get there. So that's what our position is.
Again, there's a lot of folks in this room that I know would like to participate in the process. And irrespective of something that may or may not have been mailed to folks, people didn't know about the project. Certainly they didn't understand the breadth of it, what the impact would be on properties. And I think that there's a lot of people here this evening that want an opportunity to simply be able to voice their concerns and to be able to have an opportunity to have their concerns addressed. And quite frankly, it's impossible to have concerns addressed without the involvement of professionals like you have up here this evening. And you can't just get up and start talking at a siting council proceeding. You need to have professionals who have an expertise in various specific areas that are relevant to the concerns of the residents and property owners. And it takes time to retain those folks. And one frustration has been from property owners that I've spoken to so far is that there's been an unwillingness by UI to allow them to participate in the process. And in order to meaningfully participate in the process, there has to be an extension of certain deadlines within the siting council process. There has to be an opportunity to read through the application. I mean, I'll just tell you, I have a huge box in my office. I've been trying to read through it over the last 10 days. I fell asleep one night in my office actually reading it. I think it was on Appendix C of the application. When I dozed off for a little while. It takes time. And if you're going to work with folks, there has to be an opportunity for folks to have a reasonable period of time to figure out what's going on, to retain professionals, some of which will say some of the concerns you may have are not valid. Some of the concerns, maybe some of the concerns could be resolved by having an opportunity to retain those professionals, having those conversations. But a lot of people in this room have jobs. A lot of people have kids. I'm missing my kid's baseball game tonight. My wife reminded me of that a couple times already today. And I think everyone's trying to do their best to figure this out. I keep hearing that something was filed in March. People may have known about it during the summer. A lot of people in this room may have been away on vacation at some point this summer. And so here we are in October, early October. People now know about the project, and they'd like a reasonable period of time which to participate in the process and to figure this out, and most importantly, to figure out how concerns could be addressed. With regard to the 12-month statutory deadline for making a decision, within the context of land use applications all the time, there's statutory deadlines for the time which a hearing has to conclude. And when you have significant matters, quite often, it's the process throughout Connecticut for boards and commissions that an applicant would withdraw and refile, and that starts the clock back up again. Happens here in Fairfield with your boards and commissions and all over the state of Connecticut. Simply what could be done here is UI could withdraw and refile and restart that 12-month clock and give folks a reasonable opportunity to participate in the process, to try to work with UI, to actually try to work with UI, to give ourselves the time to work with UI, to try to find solutions to problems. Not just to jump in and try to oppose everything, but to really figure out what are the issues, to get folks who are professionals to educate those who have concerns, and to try to come to maybe an opportunity where there could be some sort of resolution to some of the issues that are of concerns to folks. So I hope that if we learn anything this evening, it's that for a lot of people here in the room, we need more time. And with all due respect, the explanations are helpful, but what would be more helpful is actually supporting the extension of the scheduling orders and the siting council proceeding to allow us more time to participate and to withdraw the application and to refile, to give us more time. Thank you very much.
Just for the record, Attorney Capola, thank you for your comments, is an intervening attorney for businesses and residents and is working directly with the town's council in intervening. All of the intervening attorneys are all working together collaboratively as a group.
Mr. Crosby, my name is Caesar Anquillari. I am the Chairman and Chief Executive of Winchester Capital, a member of our Republican Town Committee, and also a local Justice of the Peace. I have a few brief and factual questions I would like you to answer. First, is it true that the UI is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Spanish company Iberdrola? I'd like Mr. Crosby to answer that.
Yes?
Secondly, is it true that your parent company in Spain suffered a downgrading by Goldman Sachs due to a 25% drop in profits in June? And is there any correlation between your choice of the less expensive alternative versus the underground buried cable, which is more expensive and by my company's calculations would amount to 30% of your net profit? Do you or do you not have approval from the board of Iberdrola to make that financial commitment to our community?
Can you repeat the question before you answer it? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to do my best. It could be outside of my area of expertise for sure, but this is a United Illuminating project, okay?
Sorry?
This is a UI project, all right? This is funded by UI ratepayers, okay? That's how this is done, through a FERC process. The underground option actually would benefit the company because it would cost more and we would get a larger return on our investment through the process. We are trying to go with the least cost to the ratepayers for this project. This is paid for by the customers in this room, in all of Connecticut, and also regionally. So we want to keep this low cost for our customers. That's how this works. I'm not familiar with the Iberdrola situation there. It has no impact. I mean, what you stated there, that it's not something that we are involved in this room. We are on our behalf of UI.
We'd like to know that Iberdrola and the UI will be in business for the completion of this project. So a financial inquiry is entirely legitimate.
Like I said, this project is a UI project, and it's funded by UI ratepayers. Correct.
And then one final question on safety. I believe safety is paramount. The International Cancer Research Agency concluded there is linkage between carcinogenicity and electromagnetic fields. They went on to further state that the presence of electromagnetic fields can result in causation of leukemia in children. I would like to know, for the benefit of my community, how many studies have been undertaken by the UI that are based upon statistical safety, following on the questions earlier of the kind gentleman.
It's a good question, and there's a long history related to electric and magnetic fields. The question you're talking about goes back to the late 1970s, early 1980s. And this is one of the primary reasons that electric and magnetic fields have been studied so extensively for more than 40 years. All of those studies, of which, if you go to the World Health Organization website, they have a decent page there to reference. There are more than 25,000 studies that have been published on this topic. As you can imagine, that's an awful lot of science to take in. And it's an awful lot of science that is probably beyond most people. And so they have convened throughout the world various scientific committees formed with physicians, engineers, other health professionals like epidemiologists. And these committees have reviewed the entirety of that 25,000 studies. This ranges from the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, the ICNIRP standard that I referenced earlier. There's also one that's been done by Health Canada, the Scientific Committee on Newly Identified and Emerging Health Risks in the EU. I could go on. Not a single one of those committees that has reviewed the 25,000 studies has concluded that the EMF at the levels we see in daily life, which would be below these 2,000 milligauss that I showed on the screen.
I beg to differ with you. I believe Oxford University did conclude. And you haven't answered my question, Doctor. My question specifically was, has the UI conducted any statistical studies in these areas? The EU is beyond us. We're more concerned about our town and about our children. Do you intend to conduct these studies if you haven't conducted them already? Please answer yes or no.
I'm going to finish my answer first, and then I'll come back to your second question.
It was my first question.
None of these committees that I've talked about have concluded that EMF at the levels we deal with in daily lives is a cause for any negative health impact. Now, with regard to UI conducting studies, I can't answer for UI. I'm not a member of UI. They've hired me because I have expertise in electric and magnetic fields in modeling and assessing those. But what I can tell you is that it does take quite a bit of expertise, and that's why these committees have been formed, to be able to assess the huge amount of literature that's out there. I have one more quote from you from the World Health Organization, and it says, I'll probably paraphrase a little bit, but you can look it up. EMF, despite the calls for more research, EMF is now better studied than the vast majority of all chemicals in use today. So I think with the more than 25,000 studies and more than 40 years of research, these committees and these organizations have all come to a similarly and uniform conclusion that I've just stated.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Crosby. We'll see you at the hearing.
Hi, good evening. I've got a few questions, two of which are related to underground and are actually all related to underground. Can somebody answer, generally speaking, why Avangrid would build underground lines to and within Long Island, but not here in Connecticut? Like, what would result in that disparity?
If I understood your question right, would Avangrid build underground lines in Long Island or to Long Island?
They're doing both.
Avangrid is?
Yes, according to the Avangrid website. So why would they do that there and not here? That's question number one.
Well, I have to say I'm not familiar with that project. But generally speaking, if you've got to cross along a large body of water, I would assume the permitting requirements would require a cable laying on the seabed or just under the seabed versus trying to go through with an above ground
And then within Long
solution.
Island as well?
Within,
Not two, but with it on the island.
on Long Island, I would, that's Long Island Power Authority. I would assume we have to at least come up, onto the shoreline and get into the transition station or substation. So I think generally permitting would dictate that.
Related question, New York, as you're probably aware, they're building their line from Canada down to New York City, about 340 miles at a cost of about $7 billion. A large portion of that is underwater, underground. That's about $21 million a mile. The estimates here are $1 billion for 8 miles, almost 6 times. What would account for that price discrepancy?
I could answer some of that, sure. So you got to look at, in terms of the area that you're building your transmission asset or infrastructure in an underground. I don't have familiarity with the Canada-New York City line, sir. I would assume it's more rural, forested environment. I can't quote that exactly, but for us in our area, it's a very congested environment, right? So population in Fairfield, New Haven County, in Fairfield, it's tripled since 1940, since these assets were installed. In the area, just in Connecticut, we've gone from 1.7 million to 3.6 million people, right? So we have a very congested state. We have to look at different components of our costs in our project. We have, for underground, I can't quote their specs in the project you referenced from Canada and New York, but we have design obligations that we have to meet. I don't know if those design obligations are the same. There's different components to projects before we give you an answer that you would hang your hat on, but in this area, it's a very congested environment. We're somewhere around 9 miles. 9 miles.
Can I, without going into too much detail, can I ask
Yes,
that you, as a group, look into that and come up with a more coherent answer? Even fact check this $7 billion for 340 miles. How much of it is underground? The disparity on the surface seems to be too big to be explained by 8 miles of congestion.
So,
Full stop.
So I can add a little, perhaps additional information. I can't speak specifically for the transmission line that goes from Canada down to New York.
So the first question is, please have that information for the next
Sure,
reply.
yes.
Thank
So
you.
we can certainly.
We can do that research, I think,
Yeah,
but,
we can certainly take a look at the project. What may be a differentiating factor there is what voltage class that line is being built to compared to our transmission lines here that are at 115 kV. Also, as part of our conceptual review of the underground transmission lines, we did look at the capacity that would be needed in the underground cables. So we do have a conceptual estimate and cross-section of a duct bank. This would also include needing 2 cables per phase at about 5 inches each. You have the additional materials. You also have a wider duct bank width in order to account for that heating that comes with the ampacity need of the cables. So there certainly are differences, and it can't necessarily be just apples to apples.
Fair enough. I appreciate the more comprehensive answer, because it seems like there's a lot more juice going from Canada to New York than there is from Bridgeport to Southport.
Right, and that the differentiating factor there may be the voltage class, and I assume that since they're going from such a long distance and transporting such a large amount of power, specifically, and again, I'm not sure if there's substations tapped off that, but if it's specifically down to the city, I would assume that it is a higher voltage class than what we are installing here in
Which would be more expensive or less expensive?
it could be less expensive because you have to use smaller conductor, all right? So the higher the voltage, the smaller the conductor, and really the cost is in the infrastructure you have to build and the copper that you have to use. So,
Thank you.
and they could be going down an area that is very easy to get through without a lot of obstructions, but we'll certainly work on that. Could we take your name after this and get it back to you directly? we'll look into that project, or
Just part of the public response.
we can do it as part of the public
Yeah, I
response?
mean,
Awesome. Yep, we can do that.
We asked people to sign up, and I know that the town has a lot of your emails on this issue. If we don't have it, please email from the website, and we're more than happy to send that out to everybody. That is a good question, and I'm sure everybody in the room wants the answer to it.
And I can, sorry, I can add one more point. And again, we will take a look at that project. But that also is perhaps a DC project versus an AC project. So there are less cables that are needed to transport that power than would be a three-phase system that we're trying to install.
The last question related is, in your estimate of, I think it was 225 for the monopole project, what component of that, or how did you value, said differently, how did you value the permanent impact to the look and feel of the town of Fairfield and Southport? Is there a dollar amount in that cost? Because we talk about who pays for this, no matter what the answer is. Ratepayers pay. That's us. It's other people in Connecticut as well. We benefit from the aesthetic value of Fairfield and the coastal area. Permanent diminution of that needs a dollar value. And it's not just concrete in the ground for a pole. You have to have a component. That 225 has got to be way undervalued for the permanent diminution of value, aesthetic value, from this part of the state. And if you can, if part of your response, if you can identify the dollar value that you associated with that, as opposed, in addition to just the cost of the poles and the work, and all that has to happen as well, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to answer that from a historic and cultural impact, the view impact on the cultural and historic properties. That's something that, in our cost estimates, that's not something that we know ahead of time during the project planning, but it's based on, SHPO makes a decision based on our impacts and the reports and the information that we've submitted to them, and they tell us what would be an appropriate dollar value for a mitigation effort. And the mitigation effort is something that can be something in the local community, could be in Fairfield or Bridgeport. It's something that we work with SHPO on to come up with what our mitigation project per se will be, and they attribute a dollar value to that. So it's something that we can't assess in terms of our the planning phase at this point.
My question was a little broader than historic structures. That's super important. But look at some advertising for Connecticut. CT.gov. A lot of it has coastal images. Now, if you have your monopoles on that, it's a tougher sell unless we're going to white those out. Yeah,
right. And I mean,
but the more serious point is there should be a specific dollar value for the permanent diminution of aesthetic value, not just to structures, but to the environment, given where we are.
Yeah, and I can just add that as part of our adding monopoles, we're removing a lot of other visual clutter, we could say. There's a lot of monopoles a lot of bonnets that will be removed. There's a lot of lattice structures that will be removed. So there's a give and take with the scenic view, but that's not something that a dollar value is assessed to. So.
Do you need support assessing the dollar value?
No, we can take your question back and we'll look at the aesthetic value. I understand to the community what the gentleman's pointing out here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for being here. My name is Elizabeth Desima. I'm also a member of the RTM representing District 4. I had a few constituent questions coming into this, and I hoped that the presentation would provide those answers. But actually, it did raise two others, and I thought if I would like the clarification. I'm sure everyone would appreciate it. So your slide about the alternatives is, just to clarify, are those alternatives that you negotiate with the municipality, or are those the alternatives that UI develops in-house, strictly to fit the property or the venue?
So those alternatives are alternatives we work with our internal teams and design engineering firms on, and some of our experts around our project areas, and then come up with justified cost estimates, design criteria, et cetera. And then those are all, included in the siting council application.
Okay, so just to temper people's expectations, at this point, as interveners have now emerged, are there alternative plans that are negotiated at this point? That may be a bigger question than you can answer, but I want to make sure people have reasonable expectations.
That's a good question. So alternatives that are up there, they're up to the Connecticut Siting Council. Again, we present alternative one to them as that is our most cost-effective, compliant to design criteria, trying to minimize or mitigate any impacts to built environment, resources, minimizes, Dr. Cost pointed out, EMF. So there is opportunity, right, to where we have a concept of a design and an alternative. That is what we're presenting in docket 516, that to First Selectwoman Kupchick's point, that we could work on where those are located, how those are structured, relative heights. We're evaluating those things. We've heard things come through the interveners. But so that's where we're at. That's the expectation, I guess, to kind of give that
Okay,
back.
2 more quick questions. It's a little concerning to hear so many people say that they didn't receive communication. So again, just to clarify for the public, communication in your vernacular is directly between UI and the affected residents. Does it go to the administration? Are they dispersing communication? Just so everybody understands the conduit, pardon the...
Understood. So a little bit of baseline on that, right, to give everyone perspective. So through the siting council process on our transmission line project, we notify property abutters around the substation interconnections with our transmission line. We also have, on top of that obligation, notified all the properties that abut our project area, right? So all we sent. So we sent letters, we sent postcards, bill inserts. We posted on our Facebook website and also the municipality's Facebook websites. We tried to reach out through means of communication. So that's how the process goes. Some of the stuff that we're required to do, and additional stuff we went above and beyond on.
Okay. Thank you. Then the last question is in terms of cost. So, everybody assumes that it gets passed on to consumers, but I don't know if I've seen anywhere that there are federal infrastructure funds that companies like UI have access to, grants, anything of that nature on a federal level for projects like this.
So we have a group within United Illuminating or Avangrid that is evaluating the capabilities of UI interacting with some of those federal funds provided to the state of Connecticut. That's not our group. We would get that information flowed down to us. A little bit of cost component to us. So as Mr. Cole mentioned here, this is a ratepayer-borne project, right? So it's borne by New England, right? Right now, the costs will be shared by New England, where UI ratepayers, I believe, were, as I referenced, 6%? 6% of the total cost of what we have would be shared by UI. Another, I believe, 18% by Eversource, and then 1% by the other local municipalities like Wallingford, Norwich, and Norwalk.
So it's your aggregate customer base in New England?
Yes, miss. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name's Bill Llewellyn. I'm property owner, and probably have to disclose, to be all honest, I did get a postcard from them about 2 weeks ago. So they did do a mailing, and it went to all the people along that. I know that firsthand. So I'm not sticking up for them. I'm just saying, stating a fact, if it wants to be transparent in that. So they are being somewhat true, but I did just get it 2 weeks ago. My question to you is, though, my building is up against the tracks business. You have an easement coming through a third of my building. You're talking about no eminent domain, but how are you going to have an easement through my building without taking it or doing something to it, is my question.
Thank you. Appreciate that question. So I'm assuming the easement that you're referring to is related to a permanent easement for the transmission line? Or do you know?
Yeah, it's a permanent, yeah.
Okay, so just for clarification, we have the transmission line easement for the purposes of blowout, vegetation clearing, maintenance on our line, right? We've surveyed properties, we've done everything we can to get that information, understand what the structures are on those properties, and the easement request will be an as-is condition to where your building is on your property, and we recognize that it's there, so our design is built in terms of safety mechanisms around your structure.
Okay, so you're not
Sorry,
touching the building.
I apologize, that
you're-
might have been fact. So for clearance requirements on the line, right, so our lines are designed so they're further enough away from your existing structure, right? So for the purposes of the easement, we look at what the wind and ice load blowout is. So in category 3 storm, Mina? Category 3 storm, we look at what that blowout, call it radius or distance is from where the line sits at rest. And we say that's how far we need an easement into that property for the proposed project, right? So the easement will basically allow our crews to go into that area if we have a need for maintenance, a need for an emergency to go do their activity. There's not a means of we're taking over your property, you no longer, can use your property. That's not what we're saying there.
Okay, because it's going through my building, the easement. So that's what I'm saying. The line draws right through my building.
So he can have a second floor to his building after.
I have, well, we already have, it's a
So
two-story building.
the easement will be a process to where it's the same for every building and every known location that we are requesting an easement for. And it would be we're working with the property owners, yes, correct. Once we get a decision. So we would ultimately ask that your building stays where it is, and that would be negotiated to cohabitate on that property where we're proposing the location, whether it's on CDOT property and the easement for the line blowout, maintenance purposes, vegetation clearing goes into your property. And then we would compensate for that purpose. There's a process that we have that we work through in terms of the appraisal that we referenced earlier and determine the area that we
we're
need.
right up against, there's no, vegetation or anything. We're right up against the tracks, pretty much. Because I want to put a new roof on. I need a new roof after all this rain. Because I don't want to drop $20,000 or $30,000 only to be said, sorry, we're taking your building. That's my concern here. So
Well, I think every easement is a negotiated instrument, isn't it?
Correct.
So we have to decide that at the time when we contact you, how we're going to structure that contract that we have with you.
And when
Easement
do you
I always
plan-
look
when do
at
you
as like a
plan on
dotted
doing that?
line.
I mean, that's the question. Is
Yeah.
When do you plan on doing that? Because,
Yeah, and what's the timing on that?
So the timing on that would be in 2024 after our CSC decision.
Okay, that doesn't help me. All right, thank you.
Could you just clarify a little bit, because I'm misunderstanding. So does UI currently have an easement on his property because he's close to the tracks, or is the pole on DOT property, is the proposal to run through his property? I mean, is that the proposal, to run through, like some of these applications, people's property? Like their actual business, the building, the structure?
It is to run over the structures that are there, if that's the case. I can't see the case for exactness for Selectwoman on his location, but it would be over his property where the easement would be needed, if that's the case of what we're hearing.
Are you saying the wires above his property, or are you, what are you, I'm unclear of what you're saying.
Saying the easement in the case, I'm making an assumption based on his location. He referenced that the easement is over his building, the easement need, right? The easement doesn't necessarily define the exact location of the wires at rest.
It does, and that's right up against the track. So he can't be on the catenary structure, which means he must. Like, just be clear with us. We're here because you said you wanted to work with. Want to be clear. So please, clear.
Okay. So you're still waiting for the answer on that. So the easement, again, the easement, we look at the line at rest, right? So the line sits where we're proposing it from foundation to foundation. You have 2 sticks with a wire in the center of it, right? And then we say, what does that ice load and wind at a Category 3 look like in terms of a blowout? Not making sense to you?
The point is, what happens from that line down over for the piece of property subject to, and I'll tell you what happens. It comes out of the lot size. So what, have you taken a look at how many of the properties that happen to?
So again, there's a process for the easement when we have an approved project, or we will negotiate with the landowners to try and cohabitate. Sir, go ahead and ask your question.
I'm going to wait for them to calm down.
Mr. Crosby, for some of us that have just moved in, have you issued a list of every affected property?
Can we let the next person who's waited patiently and all the people who are in line, and then if you have a question, please line up.
Well, I think that answer was unresolved, and we really got to work on that answer, quite honestly, and get it very clear to folks on how this all works out. And, you know, we're committed to do that for you. You know, I think the concern is that every case can be a little different, you know, a little special, a little situation. And an easement is something we have to negotiate with the property owners. So we're gonna send you that information on how that all works. Okay. We will provide that, whatever means is necessary to get out to this group.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for setting this up, Brenda. Appreciate that. And for UI being here to listening to our comments. My name is Bob Hill. I don't live here in Woodbridge. That Caesar can attest to, because he's a smart guy, and when he was in Woodbridge, he's just as smart here in Fairfield. So we'll see where we go with this. All right, I'm going to start off with a little bit of an example, maybe to hit home for UI how this process I see is a little bit flawed. So we became aware of this back in June. Fortunately, the town reached out to us and made us aware. We're in the process of building the Illicit Brewing Company site across from BJ's, 25,711 square feet, or that it's in our landlord's property there, who was a resident of Fairfield here. So as we became aware of that, we had a call, Leslie Downey. She was very polite and very helpful in terms of explaining how things worked. And one of the things that became very clear to us as we began going through that discussion was any of our concerns with the development of the property would not be heard or listened to until after the siting council had approved your project. As you referred, it's not a project, although at one point you did refer to it as our project. So, have some experience watching this process through the siting council in the past in Woodbridge, as Caesar can attest to, when we had our power lines upgraded there too, and also as we've seen cell towers put in. And pretty much what happens, and I think you already know this, once the siting council rules in your favor, pretty much you have jurisdiction to do almost anything you want. That's just my opinion, and I've watched the process unfold at that point. So now I'm going to give you the example I think that would be really neighborly, and I think that you wouldn't have so much backlash with the people that are here tonight if you did a little bit differently and a little bit more transparently working with the neighbors. It may take a little longer up front, but probably more effective in working with the neighbors. So if I was to put a fence in my property, I can probably go to the town, apply for putting the fence in, put the fence in, and not be concerned about my neighbor next door. But if I'm smart about it, I go to my neighbor before I put the fence in and say, hey, look, they're going to put a fence in, and it's going to face your property. I'd like to get your input on it. I don't have to, but I want to be good neighbors with you, and I'm thinking of putting in whatever happens to be, and at least my neighbor feels like, wow, he's not going to just run me over. And I think that if we had a choice to make, which has already cost us money. There was going to be a beer garden in the back of the property. Unfortunately, we learned that you're going to put a monopole right at the back of our beer garden. So with that, we went back to the architect and went back to our landlord and said, look, we got to reconfigure what we're doing here. We're going to move the beer garden actually partially inside the building because we need to leave that parking lot in the back open because UI is going to come along later on and they're going to tear it up on us. That's not going to be good for business for us. Top of it, as I was looking at where all the poles are located, some common sense, I think, should be used in looking at how you approach what you're doing. So you have another pole that's going to be placed at the Metro North train station, at the very end of the platform where people come off. So there's an opening that's probably 12 foot wide. You're going to put a pole right on the other side of that sidewalk. So it'll be nice and convenient for people to hide behind the pole. So when people come off the train, they won't know those people are there, so they can be able to do whatever they want before they get to their car. Common sense would say you wouldn't put that pole there, okay? But, it looks like it's going to go there. In some of I made some notes here as I was looking at it. So one of the things when you get siting council approval, if you get that, you mentioned you really can't do anything about the DOT. If all the residents are kind of forced into this assessment situation with their properties, why does the DOT, why does the DOT, why don't they fall into that same category?
I couldn't answer that for DOT. We work with them to present them our project or an alternative, and then they do their due diligence and go through their process.
Okay. In your slides, you had it was 4 times the cost. I think 255 times 4 would be like $1 million, and I think you had 745. I think that's 3 times. So just small little detail there. All right. And my last question here is, actually not last, I'm going to go back to another thing I said earlier. Why not consider where you can do underground rather than saying it's all or nothing?
As I did mention, sir, that some of the interrogatories we're getting or late files from the siting council, maybe I didn't call it a late file, but some of the opportunities we're working with them on is different segments of underground. I can tell you there will be in the next late file, which I believe we filed yesterday to the siting council, there is a discussion about an underground segment for a certain section that was asked in our last hearing on August 29th.
And what section would that be?
So that would be the north side from 648 over by Sasko Creek out to Ash Creek.
Ash Creek, okay. All right.
What number about, so I apologize for the reference point of locations. So structure-wise, 7th.
It's structure 648 where we terminate and the wires cross over to Eversource on the other side of Sasko Creek. And then it would continue on east all the way down to Ash Creek substation.
That would be the entire town of Fairfield, yes. That's an alternative we've been asked to evaluate for the siting council, yes.
Okay. Does that include near the Metro train station or no?
It's an entire length of underground, yes, sir.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to go back to something that I mentioned before. So I recognize the lengths of the between the poles is pretty extensive, and I could see in looking at the plan that I guess the swag of them, there's some latitude in terms of where the poles are placed. Rather than waiting until the final plan is approved, we've already made modifications to our plan because of the beer garden. There's another pole we have a concern about, and we were hopeful that that would be addressed where that could be moved, hopefully 25 to 50 feet, which is the pole that I mentioned before at the train station. Is there any possibility that somebody could give us a positive answer on that before other plans are drawn?
So right now, our plans right now are at around 70% engineering design for our project, right? There's another phase after the siting council decision that's called the development management plan. And I might have gone through that a bit too quickly or not even referenced that, but it was on the slide. So that really defines our final design of what it looks like in construction methodology.
So
right?
you're
So
not really at this point willing to consider input right this second?
I didn't say that, but what I'm saying is that we can consider the input of adjusting the structure locations to try and accommodate those requests by property owners in the area for the design that's under 516, yes.
And when would those adjustments be considered and implemented?
Well, we don't know every single location. I believe that's why First Selectwoman Kupchick is working with the attorneys of the interveners and has some public interaction, and that UI said we're definitely willing to work with First Selectwoman Kupchick to try and make it a more efficient process, knowing that where we're at with the CSC process also.
I don't think you answered my question, but okay, I don't think I'm going to get an answer. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for setting this up, and good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paul Whitmore. I'm the Senior Minister of Southport Congregational Church. We have a church of 760 members. There are 100 children in our preschool with all of those parents. Our church backs up directly to the railroad tracks where the UI will be claiming permanent use, is my understanding, easement of our land and parking. I guess a question is that I'll ask somewhat rhetorically is, where does a multi-billion-dollar gorilla sit? And the answer is right on top of your home, on top of your business, on top of your church, on top of your community, smothering smothering the life right out of you, and making gobs of profit at your loss. That is this project. Our entire parking lot is needed for a weekday preschool of 100 children. My understanding is that our parking lot, as well as Trinity Church's parking lot next door, is going to be used with your easement for the use of your trucks in the building and so forth as a work area for maybe up to 2 years. This will severely diminish the operations of our preschool, of our thrift shop, may possibly shut down our preschool and just cancel that out. Make no mistake, this is not about the greater good. This is about a multi-billion-dollar company making even more profit at the expense of individuals, businesses, and communities. Proper notice, by evidence of all our response here, time and again, was not given by UI. They did not you did not accurately disclose the honest scope, impact, and cost of the project, not for yourselves, but for the citizens. Grabbing up the use of properties, while we have absolutely no recourse until after a decision is made. You talk about negotiations, that's after decisions are made and we're trying to negotiate out a cost. This is not about progress, this is about profit. There is another way to accomplish the goal of moving energy without crushing individuals, communities, and businesses. And as we've asked, many of us, and as you have responded in some ways, but fascinatingly with so much technical knowledge, technical language and jargon, doublespeak, every time a specific question has been asked so far, it has not been answered. It has been vague, it has been evasive, or the best. So, thank you for nodding in acknowledgement. Or the best thing that comes back is, you'll get back to us. My guess is that you're going to get back to us in the same way that you claimed that you informed us at the beginning. The cost of burying the lines is a pittance compared to the far greater cost that all of us are going to be paying for this forever if you do not bury these lines. In terms of this plan is a definition of injustice and abuse of power.
Yes, miss?
Avenue have the same issue as the gentleman at his. They're going to be as a construction point for how long this you're going to disperse at least 35 parking spots. Where are we going to park? We're going to lose property on the backside, so we're going to learn parking spaces. Also, are we going to? What are you going to do for our parking spaces? Get on the road, have all stores in the center of Southport. If we park there, what are they going to do? They're going to lose all their people, businesses as well, or do we have to close? Thank you.
My name is Doug Freed. I'm a resident of Southport. It's always hard following. I realize I should not try to follow Paul Whitmore because he so eloquently said what needed to be said. But I just have a couple of points. And I apologize for getting the attorney's name, Attorney Capiello or Capolo. It seems that almost everyone here did not learn about this project in January when the first filing was made. Some people heard in June. Most everyone heard either in August or last month. And so what Attorney Capolo said makes, I think there's been a lot of good points made, but to me the most forceful point is that I think the professionals need additional time to respond in an intelligent fashion to the points you have made. And I understand that UI as a utility working on behalf of the people. I'm not going to try to get into an argument as to whether or not you're doing an effective job or not. But I think that there is some negotiation on both sides that needs to get done as to what is the best approach. What are of the 5 alternatives that you mentioned? The $785 million seems like a lot of money for 8 miles, which is 40,000 feet. That's $20,000 a foot, which seems like a lot of money to lay pipe. I realize there's a lot going into that, but none of it, I'd say 80% of the people here have no expertise in this. So that's why we need to be properly represented. We need a sufficient time to get that done. And I hope that there will be time given so that the interveners and the experts or the people with knowledge in this, among the community, can respond and work through this with you. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. One quick note. We just wanted to answer what would a statement you thought might have been a question around the construction and things of that nature. Matt Scully, who handles some of our construction, or handles our construction, is going to provide a response.
Thank you. So I'd like to answer the lady's question regarding the parking and the construction sequence that we go through during this process and the gentleman's concern with the churches. So the gentleman made a statement that this is a 2-year process. That's an untrue statement for your property. The project overall in the area would be about 2 years. The process for each pole is a couple of months, but it's broken up into small segments. So we're not on your property for several months for the duration. We'll be in there for about a week to drill a foundation. We'll take that material out, we'll leave the area, we'll come back, we'll set the pole. That's a couple of days. We go away, we come back again when we string the new conductors. That's a couple of days. We also take into consideration, and we work with each individual property owner, the time of construction that we can do the work. You run a business during the day, we wouldn't take your parking spots during the day. We would come in at night. We would work night hours, we would work weekend hours, we would work off hours so your daycare isn't obstructed. You would lose during the foundation installation, you would lose some parking in the back of your in the back of your lot adjacent to the railroad corridor. I don't know exactly what church you're referring to. There are several that we're going to be, impacting, but I don't know exactly which one you are. So you're not going to lose your entire parking lot for 2 years. You're not going to lose your 35 spaces for the duration of the project. Like I said, we'll come in for a couple of days at the beginning to do the foundation work. That's probably the most obtrusive or intrusive operation during the process. Because the equipment is so large, we do need to leave it on site. The trucks go away during the day, so you'll have one piece of equipment there. Probably 8 parking spaces for about a week. After that, we work with you to do off hours. So we do cordon off the work area so that the general public cannot get into it. We do take the safety precautions to make sure that we'll put up temporary fencing. Like I said, the work would not take place, if you run a daycare during the day, we would come in at night. So our operations would be a night operation so that there's no general public in the area while we're working.
So can I just have a public service announcement? Someone in the front said someone left their Volkswagen keys or dropped them, and it has a black ring on them. Anyone drop their Volkswagen keys for their car? Is that you? Okay. They're right here. Okay. If we could just allow the people who did take the time to go and stand in line, allow them to ask their questions, and then if more people want to come up and ask them, I think that would be most appropriate.
Go ahead, sir.
My name's Steve Ozick, and I live in Southport. One, I want to thank you for coming because I wouldn't want to be sitting in your seat. And I get it. You have a really hard job. So I don't think there's a single person in this room that wants to stop power. We all need power. We all want power. We recognize that there's a need to, harden the grid, to be smarter with the way that we transmit power across the entire Northeast. We're building a lot of offshore wind, and we want to get that, and that's green, and hopefully that'll make a dent in climate change. So the expectation when you came was that you would come and be an honest broker tonight, that you would shed some light on some things that have not been transparent to the community up to this point. And the hope is that you weren't here to placate us. So that's actually what everybody in this room is hoping for, is that you're not here to placate us, and that you're here to
We are
work
not
with
here to
us.
placate you.
Okay.
We are not. We are listening. We're taking it all in, absorbing it. I understand the passion in this room. I'm hearing it all. This will all go back to my executive management for discussion. None of this will be lost.
Great. So at the beginning, you mentioned there's a process. And in that process, there's room for people to step in and be interveners, and you invite us to do that. So the question that I have is that a real invitation? Is that an invitation that stands right now? Are you inviting anyone in this room to intervene?
Anybody has the right to intervene in this process. I'm not sure what was alluded to earlier, that we oppose that. I'm not sure about that, but the state law allows you to intervene. It's simply you ask for intervener status. And
Are you
get,
inviting us to intervene now?
certainly, everybody is welcome to intervene in this process. Sure.
Okay, great.
We don't make that decision, so you would need to follow the siting council process to intervene, sir.
Agreed. So the next question that I have is, if you are inviting us to intervene, would you oppose on the record anyone who intervened now? So let's say, for example, this woman right here said, I'd like to intervene, and she's going to write to the siting council to be an intervener, and she asked to be an intervener and follows the siting council measure. Will UI oppose her request to intervene?
There wouldn't be a reason why. Right, so there's a process, and we follow the process, and we've outlined the timeline multiple times, and I'm sure everyone's heard it. So you can, if the siting council accepts it, you know, UI does have a right to go one way or the other, oppose, or I guess 3 ways, agnostic or accepted, or so if you wanted to, you have every right to intervene.
Right, but in the concept of not placating us, right, being an honest broker, tonight, you know, I'm assuming UI sent people who can make decisions into this room. And so the question is, do you have an interest in people coming and being part of the process, intervening, and will you oppose them? Will your lawyer say, I oppose this petition for intervening? That's the question. It's a binary question, yes or no. So will your attorney say, I oppose their request to intervene? Because he's opposed every other request to intervene. And since it sounds like you've had a change of heart and you don't want to do that anymore, and you want to be an honest broker and you want us to be involved in the process, will you oppose that any further?
Like I said, I'm not aware of us opposing interveners, quite honestly. We'll have to check. Are you aware of that?
So we oppose the request for schedule extension.
For schedule
a
extension.
continuance.
You also opposed every intervener request from the 11 private businesses, the 7 private individuals, the town of Fairfield, and an organization called the Sasko Creek Neighbors Environmental Trust. Every single request to intervene has been opposed by Bruce McDermott, your attorney. So the question is, are you now showing a change of heart and you're inviting us to participate and you will not oppose our requests? That is the question. Yes or no?
I got to look at the specifics for why we opposed it in the first place.
So, right. So respectfully, Mr. Cole, once again, this is the problem. I think you see this. This is the problem right here. What you're doing is you're placating us. And it feels disingenuous. It feels disingenuous as a homeowner to have somebody come and trespass on my property and put in survey stakes, and then to call your person that you put in our community and ask her, are they looking to take any easements? And she says, no, they're not. And I said, well, you know, it's interesting. I went on to the docket 516. I looked it up on the map, and it looks like there's easements. She said, sir, I can assure you there are no easements. So I don't understand why this is so hard for a company that makes $1 billion a year out of our pockets. I mean, you send us a bill every month. We get it, we open it up, we pay it, we do our part. Why aren't you doing your part to be transparent? So here's the request. And once again, I'll ask another very pointed question. Will you take a step back and refile the application and hit do-over and allow us an honest opportunity to come to the table and to sit down with you? Because we want to work with you. We don't want to obstruct power. We all want, you know, transmitted power that's going from offshore to New York. We want a resilient grid. We want these things. We just want to do it in a responsible way.
Like I said, I'll take that back. I'm
will
gonna
you
take this back.
refile?
I'm going to take this back to my executive management. All of these discussions after tomorrow, we will have this discussion internally. Cannot give you an answer right now on that.
When would you be able to give us an answer that you'd consider refiling?
I cannot commit to that, but it'll be as soon as we possibly can get together and have those discussions internally.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just to note, though, with the business owner, Mr. Llewellyn, whose business is on the railroad tracks, he just got notice 2 weeks ago. So, I mean, I'm sure there's other instances like that. I want UI to think about that, and people who are just getting notified to have the opportunity to be able to file an intervenor status when they're just being noticed just 2 weeks ago.
Hi, my name is Dan Zelson. I'm a Southport resident. I just have two cost-related questions. When you considered your option one, your preferred option, and the cost associated with that, did it also take into account the easements that you're going to have to pay for, the takings you're going to have to pay for? And I guess I'll let you answer that question, but I am in the real estate business, and generally those are subject to negotiation, so I'm not quite sure how it could take those costs into account.
Thank you for the question. Yes, we did. We looked at, what the estimates for that need would be on the easements.
Okay, second related question to the underground cost. If I understand it correctly, the cost of whichever option you go with is going to be borne by the ratepayers, and some of that is going to be borne by people here in Fairfield, and some of it's going to be borne throughout New England. Can you give us a general idea for, again, let's start with your preferred option, what that would cost the average ratepayer in Fairfield to pay for that, whether that's a one-time cost or it's an add-on to the bill? Just curious what we're looking at going forward for that.
Yeah, I don't have that calculation on the top of my head, but it is spread out over the life of the asset. But it's not a one-time.
So to put it into just a general dollar idea, is it?
I apologize. It's just not my area to try to translate that. I know some folks in our company that they can say $100 million project is going to equate to X amount for a customer. I really don't have that.
I think that would be something that would be really helpful for us to understand as a community, that obviously there are other costs associated with people's property value and aesthetics and all that. But I'm just, if you said to us, your choice is to pay $3 a month more for your preferred option or $9 a month more for an underground option, that probably would be something that would be helpful for people to understand.
We certainly can do that calculation. Yes. I personally can't do it, but our finance group can do that.
Great. So if that could be communicated back to the town or the community in actual dollars and cents, I think that would be a calculus that people would really need to understand. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you all for coming, first of all. I know this is a difficult task. I'll be very, very brief. You had just spoken with Steve, who mentioned the objection of United Illuminating Company, and nobody at this table really recognized that. I have a hard copy of it right here. It's called Objection of the United Illuminating Company to Request for Intervenor Status. Just want to give you a copy.
My name's Megan McCloat, and I'm really glad he did that, because I'm going to refer to that in a couple of my questions. I am not a property owner that's impacted by this, but I arguably lose power all the time up where I live, so I guess that's a little bit argumentative, but I won't get into that. I won't waste your time. As everyone else here has said, I think we're all really grateful that you came and gave us this opportunity. So I want to start by thanking you for that. It is a different seat to be sitting in, and I know it's not easy. But now I am going to switch courses, because I think it was almost a false representation of what you were planning to do tonight. Whether it was intentional or not, I feel like the people that really need to answer these questions are not the ones sitting in your chairs. And I find that a little difficult. From some very high-level, direct questions I want to ask, in any proceeding, at least in the state of Connecticut, there's very basic starting points in order to bring an application, a petition, a complaint. And in the beginning, you start with jurisdiction. We've done a lot of talk about jurisdiction, sir, in your presentation. And although your presentation was very thorough, I did find that it was a lot of scientific maps and things that were really, really bogging the audience down instead of getting to the major issue, which could have been identified on slide 1, which was the fact that all of these bonnets you refer to sit on top of CTDOT property. Is that true? Yes or no?
Yes.
So the entire jurisdiction of everything we've been talking about for the last almost 3 hours has been in reference to CTDOT-owned property?
So
Yes or no?
it's not an easy yes or no, right? So you have our bonnets on top of the catenaries. In this segment of the program, Fairfield to Congress,
Yep.
there are also single circuit monopoles there that are on the north side from Sasco Creek
Yep.
over to our Ash Creek. So just clarification.
Yep, so
for your
I'll
point.
rephrase that. The majority of this project takes place on CTDOT property.
The existing assets are on there, yes?
Yes. Is anybody here in any of your seats a representative from CTDOT?
No.
Were they invited to this meeting?
No.
Is there a reason they weren't?
It's a UI project with an alternative we have for what we're
It's a
presenting.
UI project that you make an application to, and you are told, no, certain alternatives cannot even be discussed by the CTDOT. You said that earlier, right?
I did, that's correct.
And nobody is here from the CTDOT. You confirm that?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so now I think we've got the jurisdiction issue down, that we're not even certain that we can even talk about the things that we're all talking about proposing because the person who can answer that question is not in this room and apparently wasn't even invited to come. So then we get to this notice issue. And everybody's been talking about the notice, and I just find it really incredulous that there's absolutely no graph or exhibit or attachment that references proof of notice to any one of these property individuals. And in fact, in your application to the Siting Council, which we've referenced a million times in these hours, the application doesn't even include an attachment or an exhibit to a proof of notice. In any proceeding in the state of Connecticut, you've got to serve the person, you've got to provide notice for land taking, there's got to be proof of that. Are you aware that anything was submitted to the Connecticut Siting Council that showed proof of actual notice to a single property owner that's impacted by this application?
I can tell you, we mailed out those notifications.
Do you have a proof of notice, a proof of the postcard, a certificate of
I'll have
mailing,
to
a
look,
tracking
yes.
number?
I'd like-
Not that you're aware of, because it's not in your application. That's a public docket that everyone can access. We all know the number, we all know the website. You didn't have it in your presentation today, but are you aware of having included it in your application?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so then after we get to jurisdiction and notice, then we can plead our case, right? We can then get to the entire discussion of what we're proposing, why it's cost effective, why it's green, why we're gonna save all of these power infrastructures and it's gonna be great. But we haven't even established that we have the right jurisdiction to ask the questions of the people that have the ability to make the answer. Is that correct? So we don't have the jurisdiction to be able to really even impact the land we're talking about. We haven't given notice or at least provided any proof, evidence, exhibit, attachment, nothing to satisfy what all of these individuals are heckling about they haven't received. And that we're still gonna waste hours of people's time, scare them all about their electric impact, their home, their land taking and everything, pleading a case that we haven't even established the initial jurisdiction from. That's how I see it. And my last question, because I'm not gonna make you answer that one, because I think we all know the answer, is anybody here an actual counsel to UI that is in a position to answer the questions relating to the exhibit my former gentleman just submitted about what your intentions are in terms of responding to those intervenor applications? Is there an attorney that represents UI in this room at this panel?
There's not an attorney on the
Were they invited to come tonight? With
No,
all
we do
of-
have an attorney here.
Oh,
So the attorney reference is not on the panel. There's an attorney.
there's an attorney here.
Yes,
So
but not on the panel.
did we want to give him the opportunity to answer the numerous questions that have been directed about the pending intervenor applications that we've all now been spreading information up until that last exhibit was presented, that there wasn't an objection and the attorney didn't choose to identify and answer that question on behalf of you, their client? Is he still here? I'll cede to him if you don't mind, sir.
Thank you.
Should I stand there to answer?
Sure. My name is Bruce McDermott. I'm a partner at Murtha Kleina. I represent the company in all their siting council proceedings.
Thank you very much for being here, because I think it's, now we can actually get some answers to some questions that I know some of my neighbors have asked.
Okay.
So I believe everybody has contended, but I'll give you the opportunity to answer because I think it is important for people that are going to be listening to this recording. Every single intervener application as of today's date has been opposed by UI, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and in terms of the Connecticut Siting Council, which we have deferred the entire jurisdiction of this entire proceeding to, don't they have specific timing requirements for when people can apply to be an intervener?
Yes.
And aren't those a couple days before the hearing?
The siting council set their own schedule for the intervener requests. And the intervener requests that were filed were late, which was the grounds for UI's objection.
So anybody that files an intervener application after today's date, I imagine would be met with the same opposition on behalf of UI?
No, because the siting council has amended their schedule given the new hearing days that are taking place in October and November. So they would be deemed timely filed and UI would not oppose them.
And what notice would that go off of? The postcards that were sent 2 days ago or 2 weeks ago?
The postcards that were sent 2 days ago were for this proceeding or this hearing.
Okay,
Open house. There have been other mailings that have gone out. To be clear, the siting council statute requires various notice requirements. Those notice requirements were met, and the application does contain various affidavits attesting to the fact that all the notice requirements from the siting council were met. The siting council has deemed those notice requirements as being met when they accepted the application. The notice that these gentlemen have talked about, the mailings and things like that, those are not actually required by the siting council statute. Right. The company did those in addition to what was required. Abutting property owners of the substations did receive notice by certified mail, and yes, we have proof of receipt of all those. Okay. All the residents of Fairfield also received 2 bill inserts. If you get a hard copy bill, you got notice in your bill about those. We can attest to that as well. The signs were posted about the hearings at various locations around the town, including the train stations. That was mandated by the siting council, and the company did that. The siting council published, they were kept up much after the hearing. The very first, I actually went and verified that myself upon request by the siting council. So I can send you proof of that as well. They were up after the first hearing day. The notice was required to give notice of the opportunity for the public comment session, which took place at the first day of the hearings. So after the July hearing, those signs were taken down as there was no additional public comment session.
So all of those hearing postings were in relation to the public hearing, but nothing was required by statute. I hear you and I agree, and that's a different argument about whether that statute should be amended. Nothing was required in order to evidence actual proof of notice to individual property owners with regard to what could be considered a taking of their property in the state of Connecticut. That's correct?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
Nothing was required to be submitted to the Connecticut Siting Council that actually evidenced the proof that's being alleged was sent. And we have hundreds of people in this room that are insisting they never received said proof. None of that is in your file in regards to this client.
That's true.
Okay.
The letters that went to what we call the line list, yep, which was based on a review of the tax assessor's records and the land records of the town, that was just done by the company. We thought to be good citizens and to provide the notice that apparently no one got, but we thought we were actually, the siting council statutes and regulations actually did not provide enough notice, so the company went above and beyond what they thought was appropriate, and they took this extra step. We did not send the letters by certified mail, we just sent them by regular mail.
And when we say the company went above and beyond, we just mean we're taking it for their word because we have absolutely no photocopies, no certificates of mailing, no tracking numbers, no proof that anything was actually mailed to these individuals about their property impact.
Right, I don't have proof.
We're just taking it for the word of UI. Okay, I'll end there.
Well,
Thank you.
they are my client, and I tend to do that.
You've
yes.
got to answer it, but it's,
I
statute
don't-
only requires
Quite
their
frankly,
word.
I don't see why they would lie about that. I mean, I think.
Oh,
they-
no, we don't see why they would lie about that. But I do appreciate, counsel, you coming up and answering those questions, because I think if we had the ability to get those answers a couple hours ago, some of us would have been able to have dinner. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'll try to be brief. Thanks so much for being here, Mr. Crosby.
All right, I want to apologize. It looks like, as you were right, because of timing, we did oppose this intervener status. It was a timing issue. So we just validated we would not oppose intervener status going forward, if done in the proper timing. My apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Thanks for everybody for being here. This has got to be a tough job. My name's Elliot Osgood. I grew up in this town. I went to school from Mill Hill all the way through Ludlow. I've been in this building a lot in high school. I grew up going to the Southport Congregational Church. I'm third generation, part of Fairfield. And we just moved our family back just this year, and we purchased a house on Spruce Street. So I'm a Southport resident, and my property abuts the Southport train station. So I'm doing my best to learn about what the impact might be. So thank you so much for holding it. I think just a couple of follow-ups, Mr. Cole, for you specifically. Or let me back up. Has UI in the past withdrawn and refiled related to similar projects? Is there any precedence there that you're aware of?
I'm not aware of it since my tenure.
Okay. Are you willing to sort of audit the history of these projects and sort of bring an answer back to the next hearing that we have?
I could certainly, look for that information.
Great. And then the follow-up question is, so I think you made it clear you don't have specific authority to do something like withdraw, just so that we can understand your process and sort of match our own with yours. Who would specifically decide at UI if, a motion was filed to internally have you withdraw? Who would make the decision to withdraw and refile?
Well, the ultimate decision would be up to the board. It would have to be looked at the highest levels and weighing all the factors.
Got it. So it would be at the board level. That's specifically the process that would be sort of put underway if this was a consideration.
That would be my assumption.
Okay. And then just so I can, again, help. So you said you might bring back, I think you said senior members of the UI team for a follow-up hearing, or that you'd bring back some of the...
Well, certainly. So Frank Reynolds, who's the president and CEO, certainly is very interested in this. He sat in with a meeting with the first Selectwoman last week, and he's very interested in the outcome of this, and he's very open to seeing what we can possibly do. So I will definitely be discussing with him tomorrow about what occurred here, and all the open questions we'll work on, and your ideas and thoughts, and then we'll go from there.
And do you have a commitment from Frank to attend the next hearing?
Which next hearing?
The next opportunity that we have to get together, assuming that there is one.
Oh, absolutely. I thought you meant the siting council hearing.
Excuse me,
No, we are open to holding these type of sessions as often as we think is reasonable, working with the town of Fairfield, for sure, and Frank is also on board with that, yes.
Great. Also, just a question in terms of attendance. Do you have a communications manager at UI?
Yes, we do.
Is that person in attendance tonight?
No.
Was that person involved with giving residents notice as a part of your sort of campaign to notify residents that would be affected?
Well, within the organization, we have a specific project outreach group, and they handle that. So it's a group with a manager and some leads that work on understanding the public outreach needs, project outreach needs. And in this case, I believe we mentioned briefly that they went to town records, looking at all the abutters, and sent out mailings and postcards.
Great.
I believe in 3 different years, right? Yeah.
And I know the spirit of this proceeding or hearing, whatever you want to call it, I'm new to this, but it seems like it's transparency. Communication sounds like it's really important to you. So are you willing to commit to posting all of your updates, anything that would come from this as a follow-up to your social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, et cetera? Have you talked to your communications manager about using that as a channel to communicate with the public?
I would certainly have to discuss that with the communication manager.
Okay. Would your communications manager be open to outside support if they needed help distributing some of your plans, intentions, follow-up on social media?
Interesting. I'd have to take that back. What kind of support?
Just making sure that it's distributed as widely as possible.
Certainly we can handle that internally, sure.
Great. And then I just had a quick question. Is Mr. McDermott here, is he outside counsel or inside counsel?
Outside.
Outside counsel, okay. And do you interface specifically with Frank? I guess, candidly, who's your boss?
Who pays the bills?
Yeah.
I mean, my client is the company. Frank is the CEO of the company. Jim certainly controls or directs me in efforts, I guess. So,
Thank you. Great. Appreciate
I don't know. I have a lot of masters, I think, at the company. So
We just this is just layman's term. We're just trying to figure out like who the decision maker would be on a withdrawal, how we would be communicating that process, if there is a follow-up. And just to be really specific, Mr. Cole, is your direct boss Frank, or is there a layer in between the two of you?
I work for a senior vice president. So I am the vice president of projects. So I am responsible for the execution of the work.
Okay, so VP rolls up to SVP, SVP rolls up to CEO?
Yes.
Directly?
To the network's CEO.
The chairman?
No. Catherine Stempian. No, we do not report to Ignacio Galan. No, we report to Catherine Stempian, who is the CEO of Avangrid Networks, and she has underneath her the presidents and CEOs of all the operating companies report directly to her.
Can you say that one more time? It sounds a little complex, so I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, so Avangrid is a holding company
Yep.
that holds 8 operating companies, 8 utilities, electric and gas, in New York, Connecticut, and Maine, and also Massachusetts. So we have a networks CEO who oversees all of that. And underneath that, the separate operating company presidents, Maine, New York, Connecticut, report to that CEO.
Got it. So for something like consideration of a withdrawal on a refile, how far up does that have to go? That has to go all the way up to the holding company, the board of the holding company?
It would stay within Avangrid.
Okay, great.
I really don't understand. I don't know those level of discussions, but no, the discussions, no. The decisions are made at the OpCo level. It's a UI project, so that would be the decision making there.
Great. Thank you.
And also, I will answer one question that was asked previously. UI has not previously withdrawn a siting council application.
Got it. So there's no precedent in the history of UI. This would be a new process.
For this company, yes.
Great. So that we can support making sure that these are productive proceedings and hearings. The next time that we have the opportunity to meet, can you help us in your slides illustrate exactly the process in which a decision would get made and what parties would be involved at UI?
I'm sure I can accommodate that.
Be awesome.
Yeah.
And then just last question, just because I moved in recently and I didn't get a notice. Maybe I'm a millennial and I don't check the mail enough. But did you issue a list of all affected properties? Is there do you have like a master or main list, either internally or one that you've distributed externally that lists every single affected property? It's in the maps. But is there like a list, like every single address? I mean, I'm sure you use it for your mailer.
It's in the siting council. I believe it's volume 2.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Everyone, excuse me, I can't stand these things. My name is Carolyn Jaruka. I'm a lifelong resident. This project does not impact my family's property directly, but I think the definition of the spirit of community is that we all show concern for things that don't directly affect us, that we're all part of. So I wish I had come up sooner because I think my question might clear up some of the underground issues, because clearly there's a lot of resistance to the monopoles for many reasons, but I wonder if anyone on the panel can explain some of the differences between the M&M project that went on in 2006 from Milford to New Haven, which I believe was 25 miles, and the entirety was put underground, and our scenario here is 8 miles, is that correct?
So right, 7.3 miles,
Okay.
so it's close, yes.
So I think it would be really helpful, it seems on the surface kind of a bitter pill to swallow that 25 miles was able to go completely underground, and we have issues here with the 8, and I'm curious also as far as the catenaries, but within that 25-mile range of the M&M project, was that completely absent of the CDOT issues, that just those kind of things, if anybody with the knowledge can clarify?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was not in the company for the Middletown Norwalk. Mr. McDermott here was involved with the project, so he's going to provide some insight.
Oh, great.
I really wish I put a suit on. The Middletown Norwalk project was overhead from Middletown to Milford, and then it went underground from Milford down to Norwalk. It was a brand new transmission line. There was no existing right-of-way. So we were faced with the option of, do we create a new right-of-way through Fairfield County down to Norwalk, which would have meant taking houses, businesses, and literally creating a new right-of-way. So the option was, that didn't sound like a good one, so we put the transmission line from Milford down to Norwalk underground, generally down the post road.
Okay, so there weren't any DOT issues at
No,
all
because
there?
we weren't coming off it was not a DOT-related project. It was a brand-new transmission line that was needed because Fairfield County was, not having enough electricity brought into that part of the state. There was a kind of a, I don't know, congestion area in Fairfield County, so we just needed to get more electricity down, and that was the way we decided to do it, and DOT was not involved.
So that was just sort of like a blank slate?
In fact, it was a new transmission line that had never previously existed, yes. It was a blank slate.
So, okay, so this is all because, it's complicated, it's just...
Right, this is an upgrade of an existing line, so it's just a slightly different, beast than what we were dealing with then.
And have there been any other sections that have gone completely underground? Or the majority of it go underground?
If you're talking along the railroad, the 7 projects that UI has been doing
Right.
over the
Well,
last couple of years, there's no undergrounding.
Right, so it's...
Yeah, the last undergrounding that UI did was actually the Middletown Norwalk project.
And as far as the resilience issue with the 100-year storms that are coming, obviously with far more frequency than every 100 years, I know just from my job, there's a lot of replacement that happens with the monopoles, say for cell towers. So is it not the assertion, but is all the evidence pointing to this is just the maintenance-free way to go? And so that when we do have these storms with increasing, endurance and ferocity, that going underground isn't better financially and regarding the environment?
Certainly, get to the design criteria and the resiliency of the overhead solution?
Yeah, so we do take into account the historical climate change that has come our way into Connecticut. So this transmission line is resilient in that we have designed it as our legal baseline, the National Electric Safety Code, plus additional values. We also have additional parameters that we design on top of that, which include Category 3 wind loading for our transmission lines. We also include additional 1.5 inches of radial ice that could accrete on the conductors. That's something we have seen here in the past. We also account for, if a wire was to break on the transmission tower itself, we take that all into account to ensure that these structures will stand. And then just, I guess, one more note on the corridor. All of the transmission substations that we need to all the substations that we need to connect these lines to in order to bring the power to the residents, they are all with, they back up to the Metro North Railroad corridor. So that is not only is it an existing transmission line corridor today, but is also the most direct pathway, between the substations in order to serve our customers.
So as far as the M&M project, then it's the stance of the company that it wasn't something that was done because it was more cost effective, or that it was done because there wasn't a long range thought to it. Like it's there, or is there? I guess the question is there a long range goal with the company to get as much of the lines underground? Is that when you talk about a company in the decades to come, is that part of the equation?
I mean, it is something that's quite often talked about, but it's a very expensive proposition, to underground our system. It was built in the 1800s, 1900s as an overhead system, and that's where we are today. We do try to underground selectively where we can. Anything new, if you see a residential development, we certainly go underground, or if we have some brand new greenfield work, perhaps we can assess if we're going underground or not.
I mean, okay. I certainly think going forward, as everyone expresses great concern about the environment, that there may be a huge cost up front, but certainly for everyone's children and children's children, that initial outlay might really be reduced down the road, and there might be a tremendous amount of benefits if we can maybe get away from this monopole structure and get more things underground.
So one additional thing I think I want to kind of discuss is, as well as, while you may have lines underground that may not be impacted by a tree, say, in a weather event, you also have to take into consideration the amount of time, to make a repair on an underground transmission line, to be able to find where the issue happened underground where you can't see it, to get the specialized crews in to find that, then also, to pull the cable out and to actually pull the new cable back in, splice it together, turn the power back onto the substations is a much longer process than it is for overhead as well. So that's something that we do take into consideration when we're weighing these different options.
But that's part of a dance, right? Because when you're talking about the monopoles and then the discussions earlier about the easements, which haven't even really been defined, although now that Mr. McDermott said maybe you could get into that for some of the other homeowners, because now you're talking about access to potential residential owners, to property owners, how disruptive does that then become to an economy that's already been reeling for the past couple of years? So,
So one other item, if we're coming off the DOT right away, especially trying to get to, I think it's Westway Road from our transition point at Sasko Creek, given the fact that we can't be in the DOT right away in an underground configuration, we would need to be on private property in order to bring the lines into the street. Also, something to note, if we're designing and building a line, a lot of times in the state right-of-ways in the roads, they would not allow us to put splice chambers, which are needed about every 1,800 feet. You need 2 per circuit that you're doing. So again, that's also other easement or land that the company would need to incorporate into the design if an underground solution was selected. So there are a lot of moving parts.
Okay. And just one more point to clarify, and then I'll be done. So the M&N line, none of that was replacement. Is that what you were saying?
Correct. None of that was replacement.
That whole 25-mile line was completely new?
Brand new.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
John Convertito. I am not an affected property owner, but I am a property owner in Fairfield. Before I get to what I really came up here for, I just want to rewind a little bit. With the new scheduled timing, okay, those people that were denied intervenor status because they were late, will they now get notice that they have intervenor status?
Nobody was denied intervenor status. The siting council actually approved everyone's request.
Weren't you just handed a denial?
That was my filing at the siting council opposing the request for intervenor status.
So
I lost
so
that
you
in the siting
lost
council.
all of your
Correct. Thank you very much for pointing that out in front of my client.
I just wanted people to know if they had to refile or not. I didn't mean to.
So in granting, just to elaborate a little, in granting the intervener status to all all the requests were granted, and additional hearings were also scheduled, although not on the time frame that the interveners had requested. They wanted the hearings pushed into 2024. Citing Council denied that part, but they did schedule 2 additional hearings and also granted the request for intervener status.
And just to your defense, your denial was based on timing of filing.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay. I consider myself a good neighbor, okay? And I think a lot of the kickback you're getting back here is people in this room don't consider you a good neighbor, okay? Because of the way this was rolled out. And I get that you did it by statute and everything else, okay? And there's a wing at that end of the table who's in charge of that, and I hope you're paying attention, okay? Quick question. You've mentioned a number of times a Cat 3 easement. Can you define a Cat 3 easement to me?
That's Category 3 hurricane is what we're planning
He was
for.
talking about circumference around a pole and said it was a Cat 3 easement. So far from the center of the pole out, what is that distance?
So one part that the company does look at when we're designing are the wires and when you place a wind.
You're going to put
how the
you're going to put a
yes,
pole right here.
Correct.
Okay. How far out in a circumference does that easement go?
I think you're probably talking about the blowout concept, right? So
Blowout.
we have to take a look at the wire and how far it will blow out during a Category 3 hurricane, right?
Correct.
Is that what you were talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay, so I'm sure you have that defined. What's Category 3 and what is the blowout on that 180-foot pole?
It varies depending on how long the conductor span is. I will say so the easements are based on conductor at rest and 25 feet from where the conductor is at rest back out away from the railroad corridor. And that is to align with our NERC standard, which is the North America Reliability Corporation that provides standards that we need to follow. That's for vegetation management in order to maintain proper clearances to conductors and also in weather events so we don't have any issues with the transmission lines and vegetation growing into the
But in a
lines.
Cat 3 hurricane, this pole's going to go like this.
Correct.
So you're saying it's a minimum of 25. What's this way on a pole in a Cat 3?
Yes, so the Category 3 wind load on the wires is within that 25-foot boundary that we have currently shown on the maps for easements.
Okay. So you're going to have that easement on each pole, right?
Between each span, between each pole.
So if that line runs behind my house, okay, you have a 25-foot easement over my property up to the top of the pole, correct? If I got 30 feet behind my house and that pole is on your property on the other side, there's a 25-foot easement on my property, right? A sighting easement. Is that correct? So you can service the line.
I don't know that it's that clear, that cut and dry, because it would depend on.
You just told me you're 25 foot, right? So you can service the line, okay? The line's on, there's the line, right there, for the pole. Pole goes up 180 feet. Conductor's on your side. 25-foot easement over here, right?
It would depend on where your property line is.
It's right there, I just told you.
So you're saying your property line is here?
Right.
Then we would have to see where the easement falls in relation to the pole. The easement's determined by how far the lines blow out, plus a safety barrier.
But you just told me the line's a minimum 25, right? The blowout is a minimum 25. You just said that, did you not?
The easement is based on the lines at rest, 25 feet from the conductor at rest.
So it's a minimum 25 feet. At rest, it's here.
No, so the pole's here, and then you have the arms that hold the wires
Okay.
that extend this way. So the wire would be towards the railway track. So from that, so coming back away from the railroad
What's the
line.
distance
So,
on the arm of the pole?
7 feet.
So it's 18 feet.
Correct, yes. Answer your question, yes.
Right? Am I missing that?
No.
18 feet up 180 feet, right?
I think what we were referring to is
Up to
the
the
25
conductor
feet.
level, right?
25 feet from the property line. You're correct, sir,
But
yes.
minimum 18, okay?
Yes.
Okay? Which means Mr. Llewellyn can't put a second story on his building. Remember that when you go to sell your easement. Okay? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about not being good neighbors. You're not telling everybody the whole truth.
Why are you working so hard to every single specific question? Every single one. You haven't answered anything specific.
My name's Tim Stewart. Thank you, Brenda, Jen, Tony. No?
I did earlier commit to
organizing
getting
tonight.
answers around the easements and how that process works, so I'm going to do that.
And thank you all. I know this is not an easy thing to do, but just following up on that, I thought on the plans that were issued before the Siting Council, the easement for the Southport Congregational Church appeared to be, I thought it was 25 feet or 35 feet. 40? So it's more than just the 25 feet you're referencing in this case. It's in certain cases across that line, the easements on the plans that you have submitted are much wider than just 25 feet, just as I had 3 questions. I had submitted them. They're not going to get answered, it looks like. So let me just address them here. Quick question. Does UI currently pay any fees to Connecticut DOT for the rights over the existing right-of-way? Are there any fees being paid to the state of Connecticut for those easement rights on the
You're saying no.
railroad
You're
corridor?
saying no.
No? So
I just want to correct that. Yeah, there are fees that we pay. Yes. There are fees.
So with this new project, and you're now creating a right-of-way easement, I assume, across the whole 25-mile corridor. Is that correct? There will be a new right-of-way to the south of the existing railroad corridor. Does anything as a result of this new project result in the reduction of fees that you're paying to the state of Connecticut for existing rights-of-way?
Ask your question one more time. I want to make sure I give you the answer as pointed as I possibly
So part of the
can.
project proposal here was that you're moving the transmission corridor off the railroad corridor, and you needed additional, in fact, the lines are moving to the south of the railroad corridor. You're creating a new easement corridor across that whole 25-mile line, and I'm trying to understand, is the purpose of that to eliminate the current right-of-way that's required over the railroad corridor?
So the project.
See what I'm asking?
Yes, the CDOT corridor does vary in width. It's not a specific linear distance from edge to edge. So where UI can have and place their poles within the right-of-way and not obtain easements on the abutting properties, we have done that. One of the design criteria for the project was to separate the UI asset, which is on top of the catenary, from the Metro North or CDOT asset, and that was to allow us to operate our lines, maintain our lines without having to interfere with getting track outages, getting outages on the power lines for the railroad.
But arguably then it would also eliminate your need to pay fees to the state of Connecticut for access rights over the existing corridor. So there's an economic incentive to move it to the south of the railroad line.
We
what
have
I'm asking?
existing lines that are on the south of the railroad corridor today, on top of the bonnets.
But my point is that does this project result, the effect of this project result in the elimination of that right-of-way on the railroad tracks, the right-of-way requirement on the railroad tracks that exists today?
So we would still need a right-of-way on the CDOT property for our transmission lines.
For this new transmission line?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're
Okay, that was just a
rebuilding one.
question
Yeah, I
that
just
I
want to
had.
make sure I understood your question.
Yeah, I
And
just want to
hopefully-
understand, is there an economic incentive for you to move this new transmission line to the south of the existing railroad corridor?
So how we evaluate that, right, that's a different department, and they would evaluate that cost, but I can't say if it's a reduction or an increase, but we would still need a right-of-way to answer your question on the CDOT corridor.
So next question real quickly. We're in a mode, legislative mandates to move towards net zero. I guess by 23 in the electricity grid in the state of Connecticut, we're moving towards net zero and EV in transportation modes. Hopefully, I guess there's a mandate to try to achieve total 100% EV transportation modes by 2050. A lot of studies have suggested that power demand is going to explode during this transmission time frame. My question is, once you have put this new infrastructure in place, you're just shifting initially the 115 kilovolt capacities from their existing location to the new monopoles. Does that new infrastructure give you the ability then at a later point in time, 8 years, 10 years, 15 years hence, to say double that transmission capacity from 115 kilovolts to 230 and potentially even higher?
So the voltage, overall voltage of the transmission lines wouldn't change, but the amount of current we could pass through the lines are designed to enable us to pass more current through those wires to address that capacity.
So by what magnitude on a percentage basis? If today is 100%, then in 10 years, or what's the maximum you could increase the current through the existing lines?
I don't have the ampacity rating off the top of my head for the newer conductor.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a system planning group that comes up with these designs and the conductor that they want us to put back in, looking at long-range forecasts and expectations for load increases that are reasonable. So we are putting new conductor on the new towers. We're not taking the old conductor. We're putting new conductor with higher ampacity, but the voltage will still be the same.
Okay, but the current, but essentially the new infrastructure will enable you to shift or increase current and capacity across those lines.
Yes, increased power throughput, exactly.
Last question. So, and this is a regulatory question. Did ISO New England ask you, UI, to implement this project to upgrade this infrastructure? Or did UI take this project to ISO New England or the regulatory agencies to seek approval?
We took it under a proposed plan application to ISO New England.
So this is the year 2023. When I turn now to our elected representatives, this seems to be a total failure of the regulatory process. Because this project, many of us believe, is terrible for our community. You're essentially putting in an entirely new transmission line, new poles, new lines. It's a new transmission, effectively a new transmission corridor that you're establishing, and it has huge impact on our local communities. Why isn't there a process in place where our political representatives have the ability, and I'm not going political with this, Brenda, I promise, but where our political representatives have the ability to impact where we put those transmission lines and where we establish transmission corridors. This is a brand new transmission corridor. Couldn't it have been relocated in a different location? This is maybe an opportunity for our community to upgrade, its aesthetics. You're putting a transmission line through the most densely populated areas of southern Connecticut. Right, it's bisecting our historical towns in Southport and Fairfield and potentially does permanent damage to these communities. And I guess it's not a UI question, but from a regulatory process, how could something like this occur without the input of our political representatives, as opposed to at the last minute when you're before the siting council getting final approval, we're asking for intervener status to have the local voices heard. It seems like a terribly inefficient process at work from a regulatory perspective. And my guess this is happening in a lot of other places as well, not just here in Fairfield. But any comment on the regulatory process? Shouldn't someone be looking at a 30,000-foot view, asking ourselves what transmission infrastructure do we need 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road, and where should it be located, and how should we be installing it?
So there is, within the ISO process, there's a planning advisory committee that has capabilities for people to engage themselves into. The ISO New England website can outline that for you and how you would become involved. Politicians could become involved.
Right.
We present our proposed plan application to a reliability committee. We have interaction with that planning advisory committee. So there is a process out there that's aligned. So there is people looking at it, these people in this room. I'm assuming not, since
It's
the
just
tone of the
surprising
having
that
the
this
meeting.
project's even being contemplated
So
in terms of its potential permanent impact on communities such as Southport and Fairfield. I mean, and if an underground, you don't have the right of way under the Connecticut DOT, then let's sit them up here and put political pressure on. Is it a legitimate objection in terms of what they've presented, or is it an issue of not sufficient political pressure to get the right decision made in the process here? It's just, these highlight some highly, important issuure particularly for this community. And we have a church. We're going to have a preschool. Would you send your 5-year-old to your 3-year-old to a preschool that's sitting 50 feet from a 135-foot transmission tower? What does that do long term? It's an important source of revenue for the Southport Congregational Church. Does our preschool just wither away? And how do we get compensated for that? And take that small example, multiply it by hundreds of times across this community. It's just kind of surprising where we're at right now. But thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you sort of set me up nicely, Tim, because I was going to ask if you could possibly share with us the analysis that the thought process that you put into the economic analysis behind your proposal. When you came up with the 5, I believe there were 5 alternatives that you explored, and you compared them side by side, how do the long-term economic impacts to our community factor into those alternatives?
So I believe in section 9 of the application, there is an alternatives analysis and table and some of the pros and cons of scenarios in each of the alternatives. So that's a means of that information being passed to the public or through the council if you're reading that application. Our engineering team and our design teams, we do conceptualize estimates, evaluating the different alternatives. So that information has been looked through by our teams and evaluated, and then we present them.
I don't think you're hearing my question, because I think it's all 222 pages of the application. I did see those alternatives. I see why you rejected them all, and none of them had any information in them that had anything to do with the economic impact to this community. I'm in systems, and when we consider alternatives, right, we say option 1, we can do this, option 2, we can do this, option 3, we can do this. We always have to say, long term, what is this going to mean in terms of maintenance? What is it going to mean to the people who are supporting these systems, who are using these systems? How soon are we going to have to replace those systems? In this case, this proposal that you have in front of the Siting Council is going to have disastrous long-term economic impact on our community of Southport and Fairfield. You are going to impact businesses long-term. You are going to take away people's houses. You're going to take properties and reduce property values, and you're going to make the town you're going to ruin the aesthetic of the town and the historic charm of the town, what makes it really special, and it's going to make it less desirable to other residents and businesses coming in the future, which translates to reduced taxes by the town. It's just, so I want to see where that factors into those comparisons. So I guess what I would ask you is, how much did you factor into the cost of the project? How much did you value the economic impact that you are making to our community in that proposal?
I mean, we put forth the application according to the process of the Connecticut Siting Council.
Okay.
Through the rules.
You know what?
We
I'm
put
going to
the
make
cost
it
of the
easy.
project.
I'm going to make it easy for you because the easement, the money that you allotted for easements for the property owners that are subject to easements was $30 million. That is, quite frankly, a joke because the long-term impact to our community is going to be disastrous. $30 million is nothing, and you're going to damage our communities.
Hi there, my name's Elizabeth. I'm a citizen. I live here in Fairfield. I am concerned. I know it's not easy being up here. I do appreciate you trying to answer our questions. I come from a background in cell tower communications. My question and a big concern is your economic gain in the future. If you do proceed forward with this project, with these huge monopoles, they become an additional space for you to then lease space from the AT&Ts, the T-Mobiles, the Verizons, right? So then you can gain additionally by putting more panels for our radio frequency to upgrade power with 4G and 5G. Is that something that has been looked at from your, I don't know if it's a communications director and or from your project standpoint? I know you have A&E, I know you have construction here. Is that something that would even be feasible to be housed on these future monopoles?
So each of our structures and monopoles are designed specifically for the loads that they are intended to carry. Those loads do not include cell towers or additional things attached to the structures other than what we have currently designed.
Okay, understood. They could always be reinforced, though, from my experience, correct?
Not that I'm aware of. These are monopoles that are, rolled steel.
So
They're
you
not
don't
lattice
have,
structures.
so UI doesn't have any other monopoles that have additional panels that are being housed from
we do not.
the telecom companies? Okay, all right. Well, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions in the audience that would like to come up to the microphone?
Chris, I'm a resident. I live on Mill River, and I actually am looking for more clarification on P671S and P673. Your photographic location number 5 is set down from Harbor Road, and so when we look through the UI Volume 1A Appendix C, it doesn't really depict where 5, the 671S, is going to be. So I guess I'm looking to know what the setbacks from Mill River in feet, because right now they're very close, and both of those poles look like they're going to be on the south, and you're going to be clearing a lot of vegetation. And so you've identified, you have a consultant that identified a falcon in Bridgeport, and then an osprey nest on a couple of these poles. But you didn't talk about any of the other wildlife that lives in the river. You didn't talk about the great egret nesting habitat that is potentially right where your P671S is. So since no one's really brought up the environmental in the river, my concerns are the wetlands that you keep talking about, like you're not going to be invasive. You are going to be very invasive. And all of us living on the river, we, can't build. We have 144-foot setback, so I'm just trying to wonder how you're going to be able to manage these ginormous poles right on the bank of the river, where you're putting 2 of them, those 2 particular, P671S and P673S. So if you could get back to us with better diagrams, that's what I would like to see.
Okay, we can address that. But regarding the species, we do consult with the Connecticut DEEP, the NDDB program, Natural Diversity Database Program, and that identified 2 species. One of them was the herring that is present in the Mill River. At this time, we're not proposing any work in the Mill River, and that's the, correct.
So 671S and 673S, you're not doing anything with?
There's monopoles going on the land.
Well, but they're right adjacent. They are within 10 feet of the river. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, and during our construction, we're going to use proper erosion and sediment controls to protect anything from maybe migrating down into the river, but we don't have any plans to be doing any in-water work, so we wouldn't be impacting.
So right under the bridge, you're going to be taking down trees, right south of the bridge, on the west side of the bank, which is 671S.
Okay.
P671S. And so I say that because that is a great egret habitat there. And I'm actually going to, I will submit that to DEEP because they ask for people to send evidence. And so the 2 you reference are minimal compared to the wildlife that's on
Yeah,
there.
I understand. And I think the avenues that the agencies that we search are the NDDB, and that brings up specific species that are threatened or endangered according to DEEP. We also consult with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and that also brings up rare, threatened, endangered species. Right. So that egret has not turned up on
the bald eagle,
on a species.
The snowy egret.
We've done, we have completed migratory bird surveys for nests, and at this time we haven't identified any bald eagle nests. There are osprey nests, like I know there's one right over the Mill River.
The great, yes,
Yep.
that one.
So we have best management practices in place. We've been working with the DEEP Wildlife Division on how to manage the osprey nests.
So regarding the migratory birds treaty, so when you're all of these birds that nest and they breed, a lot of them are from April onwards.
Yep.
When will you be doing work? That's the other thing. If you're doing work there, they're like one of them said it was going to finish in like May or something. Like how are they going to be able to nest during their nesting season if you're working there? Would be my concern.
Yeah, I mean, the egret has not turned up on a, I guess on a
I'm going to send a
agency
picture
series.
with about 30 of them.
Okay.
When they go to sleep, and if they go to sleep there every night, then
Okay.
that's their nest.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, we'll definitely look into what
Okay, but I would like,
I'm gonna submit.
from the photograph 5, you're showing it from all the way at Harbor Road. You're not showing it from the river. You're showing it from miles back, a mile back.
Okay.
So that's the one that's not really like a
You
clear
want clarification on? Okay,
So.
we'll get back to you.
If you could get back to that, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be quick. It's late. A quick question, just in terms of follow-up, with regards to the poles. So when the poles go in, there's a foundation that's poured. How deep is the foundation?
On the configuration of the pole, how big the pole is. Typically, you're talking
From what to what, roughly?
20 to 25 feet.
Deep?
Roughly. Yes.
Okay. And just as another point of clarification, those foundations that you're going to put in that are on the DOT property that you have a right-of-way on, are you going to put those foundations into the DOT property? So you're going to disturb the dirt and go down 25 feet and put the foundation in the DOT property?
Yes.
Okay. So sounds like the DOT might be open to actually going into and underneath, disturbing their ground. If you can put the foundation into the ground, you can probably do lots of other things to the ground.
So we do have letters based on our other projects, Millvon to West River, and I believe also this one as well from the state DOT saying that they would object to us putting longitudinal underground infrastructure within their corridor on their property.
But not horizontal. They're good with the horizontal.
Correct.
Okay. And so then the second question, my last question, is did anybody actually reach out to the Mashantucket Pequot Indians and ask them about the monopole that's going to go right on the site that is an archaeological site where the Mashantucket Indians were, the Pequots were slaughtered in 1637. Was that considered?
As part of our SHPO process, notification of the project was made to the tribes in Connecticut.
Okay.
And yeah,
Yeah, how did you do that notification?
how
Did
our cultural
did you send them a certified letter?
Our
letting
cultural
them know?
resources subject matter expert handled that communication. I believe it was an email. So, yes.
Okay, that'd be great if you can furnish us with a copy of that. That'd be fantastic.
Look for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
2 or 3 questions. One is, with wetlands that have been identified on private properties where you will be exerting easements, what have you considered as far as the distance from the identified wetlands where it's okay to put a monopole? I'm not talking about the state right away. I'm talking about private properties that are subject to easement where you will be putting monopoles.
So as part of our survey that was done by the wetland scientists, they looked along the corridor, and if there was any areas that looked like the wetland extended past the property, if it was properties that we had right of entries on, they went and delineated the wetland to the point where if we were going to be putting an access road through that private property. And I mean, I guess I'm not unclear on part of your question.
I'll repeat the question and restate it. The monopoles, where they're located,
yes.
they're dots on your site plans. If there is a dot like that that occurs on a piece of property that is not currently in the DOT right-of-way, but rather on an easement that you're taking by eminent domain easement. By the way, I want to come back to that terminology. But if there is a pole that will be placed on an easement that you're taking, I'm asking what distance offset are you considering relative to identified wetlands?
So as of now, we don't have any poles on any state or federal designated wetlands, and that's what
the properties that you're looking at now, that you are talking about taking, eminent domain is a taking. Okay, that is how it's looked at in legal terms. It's a taking. It is a superior right. I'll come back to that. But those properties that are not currently in the DOT right-of-way and therefore are not subject to PURA review, but instead are subject to local municipality review because you haven't seized them yet. You are suggesting that you're going to put monopoles with deep foundations within a certain proximity to wetlands that have been identified by the town of Fairfield. I'm asking, what distance from that identified wetland did you consider as the required distance from that identified wetlands?
Corinne,
so I believe
can I ask a quick question, Tim?
Yeah.
Sir, are you asking about the upland review area? Is that what you're asking about from the state or federal delineated wetland line?
I'm asking the town of Fairfield, because you're taking private property, okay? And so anyone who is here who has a piece of property, if they want to build within a certain distance of a wetland, there is a required review process that is a certain distance from that. And you don't own those properties yet, and you're saying you're going to put poles there, and that's not currently being reviewed by PURA because it's on property that you don't currently own. So PURA has not looked at that. So I will ask the question. This is at least the third time. I'm asking with your environmental engineers and all of your various consultants who've been working on this for 2 or 3 years. I'm asking, when they located these monopoles, how far from the wetlands that are identified by the town of Fairfield, which anyone here, if they wanted to build within a certain distance of wetland, they would be required to go through a certain process, and there is a minimum offset. And so I will repeat the question again. What distance did you consider as the necessary distance from an identified wetlands? I'm not talking about Corps of Engineers. I'm not talking about Pura. I'm talking about property that you're taking and poles you're going to be putting on people's property, people in this room.
So I believe you're talking about the local wetland buffer zone. So as part of the siting council process, we are not subject to the local
Everyone in this
local
room is subject to
regulations.
that. Everyone in this room.
So clarification, sir, just real quick. So the siting council has a process, right? And we submit to the siting council for review of our project. Part of that review comes through with municipal consultation through the municipal consultation filing. As it relates to permitting related to resource areas, we look at state or federal agencies to interact with. The local interaction is at the municipal consultation filings stage of the project. So the question is a little bit more blended. I know it's not appreciative of the audience, but when we go through our process, we submit to the council on our proposed plan for our project. Okay, we delineate our wetlands, our resource areas, you heard Karine talk about the rivers, inland tidal, etc. We look at those state and federally delineated areas, and we would permit appropriately for those with those state and federal agencies. And I'm sorry, go ahead. I don't mean it. I just wanted to clarify that.
So, am I to understand that you didn't look at the local mapping that of these properties that are currently private properties, that the property owners here, whose rights to that property you are in fact taking, because and this is eminent domain, by the way, and I don't believe that in any of these postcards that you sent, I didn't get one, nor did I get a letter, and one would have expected a certified letter. I don't think they ever mentioned eminent domain. But that is what, in fact, you're doing. It's an eminent domain easement, which, according to attorneys, is a quote-unquote superior right. Your attorney, McDermott, could respond to that, perhaps, but I understand it's a superior right, so it is no longer counted in the square footage calculation of the people whose property you're compromising. So not only can they not build above it, it also reduces the floor area ratio calculation for their property. And with numerous properties, with this taking that you are affecting, you not only are reducing the value of their property and their ability to build on that property, but you are also, in many cases, making those properties non-compliant with respect to zoning. I think that's the case. Maybe your attorney, or if you have an expert up here, you could opine on that. But in those cases, that means that not only will you be taking 18 or 20, or in several cases, 40 feet, you're going to be making them zoning non-compliant, which means that once this is rubber stamped by the siting council, and then it's not a question of whether eminent domain, it's a question of how much people will be compensated. But the fact that you will be making those properties non-compliant with respect to zoning means that I understand that generally means that you take the entire property. So there seems to be, I'm hearing that you mailed postcards and you went over and above. But the point of the matter is that once this is proved by the siting council, it's not a question of whether eminent domain, it's a question of how much people will be compensated. And in the case of people's property that is suddenly made non-compliant with respect to zoning, it means you will be taking the entire property. I'm eager to hear.
Well, it's a very technical thing that he's discussing here, and we got to get the experts in the room to discuss this. So we have no plans to take property. Yep.
I just wanted to say, to your question, I'm not a real estate lawyer. I have been doing siting council work for 25 years. I have never heard this legal theory that you're putting forward. Not to say that it's not right or wrong. I'm just saying I haven't heard it. Mr. Cole and I whispered before. It is on my list of things that I need to research and get back to the company on. It has just never come up in any of my projects before where someone has said, you know, you took a little piece of my property, therefore I'm zoning non-compliant, therefore I can't do anything. I'm not saying you're not wrong or right. I'm just saying I haven't heard that theory before, and I have it as a homework assignment to look into it. So,
okay. Well, I think that that's something that everyone in Fairfield should have a very explicit answer to. And it shouldn't be that you went over and above to mail postcards to people and that's the notification that they're going to receive, that eminent domain, and postcard didn't mention an eminent domain, I don't think. I didn't get one.
Right.
Okay.
I will also say, there is someone, I probably should not go too far off topic, but in all my experience with UI, they have never actually exercised their eminent domain rights.
That stands for nothing. It's a superior right. You are an attorney. Can you explain to me what a superior right is? You're an attorney. I think you know that term.
No, my only point was, you were using eminent domain. I just want to emphasize that the company has never used that right in any of its projects. Now, I just wanted to make that point, that's all. Well, I don't know, because I'm not sure why or how the property would be seized, right? It's not like, but that permanent easement doesn't take away the right of use of that property.
Yes, it does. For all intents and purposes, you do not control that property.
You can access the property still.
You cannot plant trees on it above a certain maximum height.
That is true.
You cannot build on it. You cannot use that in the calculation of your floor area ratio in terms of how large a structure you can build on the property. What you do have the pleasure of is mowing it for UI.
And paying the taxes.
Yeah. So I think everyone in this room, I think everyone in Fairfield deserves a very explicit answer to this question, because I think this is something that we all wonder about. And you're telling me you don't really know, and that you don't think UI would ever do this or that they've ever done it, but you do acknowledge that you know what a superior right is, and an eminent domain easement is a superior right. Period. It's a superior right. You are giving up your control of that property.
Yeah. I was doing, again for the record, Mario Coppola. I was listening to this back there, and I thought to myself, I've actually had a case where UI did in fact take a property by eminent domain in Stratford, and in that case, the specific issue, a similar issue to what you're referring to, which is by virtue of the taking, that it resulted in minimizing, in that case it was minimizing the development potential of the property, was specifically the issue at hand. And the appraiser that UI had made a determination that by virtue of the taking, it was a property on Linden Avenue in Stratford, that by virtue of the taking, it didn't have any effect on what you could build there. And we actually tried the case, and thought we had it won, but my client ended up settling with UI during it. The issue we actually put up the planning and zoning director for Stratford, and he testified clearly and convincingly that yes, in fact, if you do this, if you do this taking, if you have obviously when you're doing projects like this or DOTS projects like this, you've got I certainly don't have the breadth of experience of your council on as far as siting council work. I do have experience with regard to eminent domain law, to takings. I represent a number of municipalities in Fairfield County. I'm dealing with 6 takings now, and there were 6 potential takings in Norwalk. You've got, and obviously with DOT projects, you've got, similar, I would assume at yours, you've got your temporary easement, your permanent, your temporary easement, due to construction work, and I know you talked about a couple months. I would assume when those temporary easements actually get issued, they're not going to say for 2 months. They're going to say the construction easement will be maybe for a year or 2, because you want to give yourself some flexibility. And then you have your permanent easements, access to whatever, to what's underground, access to the pole, et cetera. And then obviously some actual takings, I would assume, of some land. But anyways, going back to this case that we had with UI, there actually was a taking. They went, they filed my recollection was they filed the paperwork with the court in Bridgeport, and they did an actual taking, and then that was challenged in the case. It was United Illuminating versus Linden Avenue Associates, and it was in Bridgeport. I'm just looking. It was docket number, by way of reference, CV 18 503-7436. I'm sure there's lots of eminent domain takings that UI has done over the years.
My point, Attorney Capoli, was they've not done it as part of that was a distribution project, I believe.
I don't know what it was for.
I'm pretty sure it was not a siting council transmission line project. The company has exercised eminent domain clearly throughout its history. My point was,
presumably,
my preface was that they have not done it as part of the siting council transmission line projects. I said on the projects I've worked with, they have not done it.
I don't know. I know that they've done it, and quite frankly, it's reasonable that a utility like UI is going to have to exercise eminent domain from time to time to get their work done, and it makes perfect sense. Just like a municipality from time to time may have to exercise eminent domain for a public use. I don't think that's debatable, but yes, I just wanted for point of clarification, UI has exercised eminent domain. I'm sure it's done many times. The specific issue you're referring to is actually the issue in our case where, by virtue of taking. By virtue of the taking, it actually reduced the property owner's ability to build a project which he actually had approved by virtue of zoning. So the P&Z director went up, testified, and confirmed, yes, instead of a 9,000 square foot building, you reduce it to like 2,000 or 3,000. And the appraisal for, I think, UI was at one number, and our appraisal was at 4 times higher number because it was based on the diminution in value because it's a much smaller building that you could build now. Anyway, so just a point of clarification since you brought it up, and hopefully that helps.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Another thing is if your easement goes over an existing building, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but because of your superior right, you control all development within that property. So any modifications to that structure would have to be, if you don't take it, which I find it hard to believe that it wouldn't end up being taken, but if you don't take it, the property owner from whom you have exercised eminent domain over no longer has the right to do whatever they want with that building. As a superior right, is that correct or incorrect? Attorney McDermott. Okay. One other question to change the subject, but we would all appreciate clarification on this. You earlier stated that when it was asked about how you recompensed communities or for the negative impacts to the historic resources. And I think that the answer was either that your consultant would come up with some dollar amount, I don't know how you would come up with that, or there was some comment that SHPO would come up with that dollar amount. Did I hear that correctly or incorrectly?
It's in consultation with SHPO.
So SHPO comes up with a dollar amount and they tell you, and then that's what you
They,
proffer?
they come up with projects, like ideas of projects, and then there's dollar values put to the projects, and then we present those and we talk about those with SHPO, and then that's how we decide what's the best, what's going to, what's the option we're going to choose, but that's in consultation with SHPO.
Can I add a little of that? So one of our recent projects, Milvon West River, right, we had potential adverse impact visually from one of our structures, right? So there was concern voiced from the Historical Society, I believe, in Milford, and we, in the process with the Siting Council, I know you hear it, it's repetitive, I understand, you want more detail, but there's a process we follow, that's how we operate. We work with SHPO, we submit our project review form, SHPO gives us their feedback back, we work through it with Milford in terms, once we had an approved project, then we interacted with SHPO, Milford, and UI to find out a viable solution to what in the city of Milford we could provide mitigation measures. Came out as a financial compensation.
And how much was
for
that, may I ask?
So that dollar value is based on what SHPO believes is the impact and what that capacity is, right?
And in the Milford case,
it was $30,000, I can tell you.
Okay,
That's the estimated value.
$30,000.
So Milvon West River SHPO, the mitigation that we provide to the city of Milford is different in terms of size and capacity than what it currently being evaluated on Fairfield Congress. We've been in consultation with SHPO. It's all in the Siting Council. It's in one of our appendices. It clearly states that the potential visual impacts are more, hence why we went out to half a mile versus what we did at 500 feet, what the initial requirement is, right? So we're working through that process. It's a process. I apologize, it's not immediate, but it's a process that we understand takes some time. When we get to a position with SHPO, we would interact. We could interact with the Historical Society, the town of Milford, city of Bridgeport, depending where those at, and figure out what a project is that we could work through these these potential visual impacts. Correct.
And has your historic resources consultant, are you aware of any direct impacts on historic properties in Southport, Fairfield, or Bridgeport?
No, no direct, just indirect.
I think you would be surprised.
Are you kidding?
There are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Russo, I'm with the law firm of Russo and Rizzio LLC. We represent the group's interveners. And I got to be careful because there's represented parties here, but there were some comments, and I just want to make a statement. And I think the way to say this is what I found in representing my clients, and if people find benefit from, what I found in my research, then they can take that. There was 5 things that were really of concern to me when my clients approached me about this, and I looked it over. The first is in the Fairfield zoning regulations, and I apologize if this has already been said, I missed a portion of the night, but in the Fairfield zoning regulations, if you have an above ground easement on your property, that area is removed from your lot area, how the town defines your lot area. So, for instance, if you have a 10,000 square foot lot and there is an easement put over by a utility company that is 2,500 square feet, the town then considers your lot 7,500 square feet. And so certain things like your coverage is based on your percentage of your lot area. So instead of being out of a percentage of 10,000, it would be a percentage out of 7,500. Same thing, there's requirements for floor area. So same thing, it would be off of the 7,500 rather than 10,000. The other issue is, in my interpretation of reading the statutes, if something like this makes your property non-conforming as to lot area, and lot area specifically, the person who takes and makes that nonconformity has to either obtain a variance or take the entire property. That's the options to them. They either have to obtain the variance because you are now non-conforming as to lot area in that zone, or they have to take the entirety of your property if they are to move forward with it. And that was one of the things that I was severely concerned about, that by placing an easement on these properties, that it might eventually end up that they would have to take the entire property. The other things were when, and I do land use in the town of Fairfield. It's one of the main towns I do work. When a property owner has a violation of wetlands on their property, that violation goes against the property owner. It doesn't matter if, for instance, there is a tenant who does something, or somebody that comes on their property and creates a wetlands violation. So there's a number of properties that had wetlands, and I was very concerned that that any work that was done on there that caused a wetlands violation, the recourse that the town would have would be against the property owner. It's the same thing for zoning violation. That when there's a zoning violation, that goes against the property owner, not the tenant, not the person who actually caused it. Another concern is, I think people who see Fairfield now, see Southport now, think of the beautiful residential area that it is. But the truth is, along the railroad tracks, as you go from Southport all the way to the eastern part of Fairfield, has very long industrial history. And people usually are surprised that if you look at the Southport zoning map, there's industrial zones in Southport that just traces back to its long history. There has been considerable cleanup and remediation that has had to happen for properties in Southport and throughout along the railroad tracks. And in fact, where some of this work is being proposed is on a property that was, I think, the largest environmental cleanup that Fairfield has ever had. Everybody saw it. It happened on the property. It happened in Mill River. It involved the Harbor Commission. It was a monumental effort. It took forever. That piece has not been able to be developed because of it. It took a very long time. And now there's proposal for work to be done beyond those property lines along the railroad corridor, and what that work might dig up and possibly bring onto private properties. And, properties that had, again, spent years and millions of dollars to be cleaned up, and now we're digging up a problem again. So it's just a general statement of my concerns, and take from it what you will. But those are the impacts that I've been looking at. There's many more that have been spoken about tonight. But those are what I think could be significant impact on local property owners. So that's all. Just
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I just want to say, I want to thank the UI reps who came here tonight to answer these questions. However, I think it's obvious that none of you, and it wasn't easy tonight, none of you are actually decision makers as far as this application goes. And I know in the meeting last week that we had with the president, it was conveyed that reapplying is a big deal because you have to sort of reset the clock. But I hope that you'll go back and talk to the president and have him even watch this meeting, because I think it's so incredibly obvious that there are so many issues with this application, and that really the only right thing to do is to withdraw it and allow our community to have a lot more input, to do a lot more research and work collaboratively so that we can come up with a plan. We know we need more electricity, but this plan is so flawed. And I just think we need to push the reset button here in a collaborative way. and work with the community and UI to come up with a plan that doesn't do this kind of damage to the community. I just think that that's the right thing to do. So I hope. So again, I hope you'll go back and talk to the president and the other decision makers, and that hopefully we can come back and sit down and have an honest conversation about withdrawing this and having a conversation about a reapplication that includes input from the entire community in Fairfield. So thank you. I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. I know you're frustrated and concerned, and I am too. So let's sleep on it, and let's hope that maybe we'll hear some good word from decision makers from you.
Thank you all
Thanks
for
again
coming.
for coming tonight.
Drive safe.